but I am writing it all down for posterity. I am writing it all down because you know what he told me? You know what Jesus told me? He said, this is going to be real good scripture reading in the future.
Hello, and welcome to WordWise. I'm your host, Kit, and despite having made more than a dozen videos about the written works of Chad Daybell, I've never done a video about Lori. That was because I thought that the only piece of her writing I had was the brief foreword she wrote in Melanie Gibbs' book, but I realized recently that we also have access to her opening, closing, and sentencing statements, so I thought I'd go ahead and take a look at them. Also, thanks to Nate Eaton, we all now know that Lori is writing her life story, which she believes Jesus will consider scripture in the future, and I'm pretty darn excited for that. If this is your first time visiting my channel, welcome. I'm a writer and former editor, and I like thinking about what we can learn from reading texts written by criminals and people crime adjacent. I hope you'll stick around. I am creating this video around my surgery in July, so I'll be recording it in multiple segments and will probably appear in different clothes at some point. Just a heads up. Before we start, I want to address one thing that I keep seeing come up. A lot of people seem confused about what Lori's legal surname is. I did some digging, and all available evidence indicates that her legal name is Lori Daybell. Her lawyer in Idaho filed a copy of her marriage certificate to Chad as evidence that her legal name is Lori Noreen Ryan Daybell. In the county in Hawaii where she and Chad got married, all you have to do is change your name when you sign your marriage certificate. It isn't necessary to file anything separately, so she was officially Lori Daybell as soon as she got married. I'll link the East Idaho News article, which includes an image of her marriage certificate, in the description. We're going to examine Lori's statements in chronological order. So we'll start with Lori's sentencing from 2023. This is what she read in court before being sentenced for the conspiracy to commit M's of her 7-year-old son, JJ, her 16-year-old daughter, Tylee, and her 5th husband's first wife, Tammy Douglas Daybell. This statement was pretty shocking at the time because since Lori didn't testify, the public had never really heard her say much of anything. I usually read aloud the quotations I talk about, but because Lori delivered these segments in open court, I'm going to let her read them. Sorry for the terrible angle on the first one. Judge Boyce was a little nervous about cameras in the courtroom. Lori begins like this.
I would like to start by quoting John from the New Testament in the Bible. In John chapter 8, verse 7, Jesus says, "He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her." Then in verse 15, Jesus says, "Ye judge after the flesh, I judge no man. And yet if I judge, my judgment is true."
My first thought upon hearing this was honestly, wow, what a cliche. How many criminals have pulled that quote out? I feel like if Jesus had known how many people were going to use his words to demand that they not be judged for horrible acts, he might have said, "Yeah, go ahead and judge," instead. But then I was immediately distracted by the fact that Lori changed the biblical quote to make it apply to herself. I don't think I've ever seen anyone do that. She kind of fumbled her words there, so it isn't clear if she rewrote the line to make it apply to herself or if she just blurted out her true feelings partway through verse 7. Either way, it's perplexing, and it's rather astonishingly arrogant. She feels qualified to edit Jesus. And she had to have known people would notice. That's too popular a quotation for the change to go undetected. But the point, clearly, is that she's telling the good Judge Boyce, who's my second favorite judge ever after Judge Cranick, that he has no right to judge her, even though it's his literal job. Lori doesn't feel that she's answerable to the criminal justice system. She continues.
Jesus knows me, and Jesus understands me. I mourn with all of you who mourn, my children and Tammy. Jesus Christ knows the truth of what happened here. Jesus Christ knows that no one was murdered. in this case. Accidental deaths happen. Suicides happen. Fatal side effects from medications happen.
Even as a non-Christian reading this for the 15th time, it's hard not to feel offended by Lori's words here. One thing I've noticed about Lori is that she switches tactics very rapidly. In this first sentence, she's saying that Jesus understands her and implying that everyone else is too spiritually unsophisticated, maybe, to get it. But then she immediately makes a hard pivot and starts trying to make herself relatable. First, she's too spiritually advanced for anyone but Jesus to comprehend. Then she's mourning along with everyone else. And she doesn't seem aware of how jarring it is to jump between those two approaches. Regarding her claims here, Lauren Mathias at Hidden True Crime says this is what Lori has always believed, that Tylee smothered JJ in a fit of rage and then ended her own life. Even though we know that's physically not possible because JJ lived 2 weeks longer than Tylee. This is probably where we see Lori's delusional disorder kicking in. But I also want to point out that people are capable of believing contradictory things, and to a pretty astonishing degree. When I hear people debating whether or not Chad believed the things he was teaching, my answer is always yes and no. I'm sure there were moments when things were going his way and he was getting the blonde and attracting followers when he believed with his whole heart. And there were moments when he was sitting in his cell on death row with no toilet paper thinking, I've made a huge mistake. That's the advantage of living an unexamined life and refusing to fact-check your own thinking. And we all do this to a lesser degree than Chad and Lori. Anyone who's ever been really torn about whether or not to leave a relationship or quit a job knows that you go back and forth, even when your friends are all pointing out that your girlfriend cheats on you and your boss opened a credit card using your social security number. Chad and Lori just take that type of vacillation to an extreme. Now, being delusional, Lori probably believes impossible things more easily than other people. What she's telling us here is that this is what she believes. And given that Lori believes this, it might also logically, and I'm using that word loosely, follow that no one was M'd in her mind.
I have a different perspective in life because in 2002, when I was pregnant with Tylee, I died in the hospital while in labor with her. They tried to stop my labor. They put me on the table and they put something in my IV and I felt my spirit falling to the floor. I was standing near my pregnant body, watching the doctors try to revive me, which took them a few minutes. In that time, my sister Stacy was standing to my left. I turned to hug her and was surprised that her spirit was as tangible as a physical body because I knew I was in spirit and she was in spirit. She said she needed to show me some things and we went to heaven. I later returned to my body.
Apparently no one is able to corroborate that Lori had a near-death experience, not even her living sister, Summer. My assumption is that it didn't happen, and I'd wager that she didn't start claiming it did until after she met Chad, who, like Tom Harrison and Julie Rowe, appears to have fabricated multiple near-death experiences. In fact, in her interview after her first Arizona conviction, Lori claimed that Chad has now had 3 near-death experiences, up from the 2 he claimed in his 2019 autobiography. Maybe he got shanked in prison. I also want to point out that Lori's NDE is an exact duplicate of Spencer's first NDE in Visions of Glory, which we know is one of Lori's favorite books. Spencer has an allergic reaction to IV contrast and falls out of his body and through the table. Lori says that the doctors put something in her IV and her spirit fell to the floor, which is also absurd because if her spirit fell through the hospital bed, why wouldn't it also fall through the floor? And the writer in me can't help pointing out what terrible storytelling it is to skip the part of the story that takes place in heaven and go straight to, yeah, later I came back.
Because of this experience, I have access to heaven and the spirit world. Since then, I have had many communications from people now living in heaven. including my children, Tylee Ashlyn and Joshua Jackson, my sisters, Stacy and Lolly, my aunts and my uncles, and my grandparents. I have had many communications with Jesus Christ, the Savior of this world, and our heavenly parents. I've had many angelic visitors have come and communicated with me and even manifested themselves to me.
I probably should have mentioned that I transcribed these statements, so all the punctuation is mine. I kind of doubt Lori uses semicolons. Although she might, she's actually quite intelligent. These 4 sentences are nothing but bragging. It's just a list of people who felt she was important enough that they had to come down to heaven to talk to her. It's basically her spiritual CV.
Because of these communications, I know for a fact that my children are happy and busy in the spirit world. Because of my communications with my friend Tammy Daybell, I know that she is also very happy and extremely busy.
This was definitely a stunning moment in the statement. For Lori to claim that she's friends with Tammy, a woman whose death she helped orchestrate so that she could marry Tammy's husband, is the definition of audacity. And apparently Tammy isn't mad at her. No, they're besties. Tammy's coming down from heaven through her portal to say hi and keep Lori company in her jail cell. This bit about how busy everyone is in heaven is very much a Mormon thing. The LDS Church encourages people to be industrious. It was also something Chad constantly stressed in his novels. Everybody had a vitally important job to do in the afterlife. But because Chad has no imagination, most of these vitally important jobs sounded like temp positions. I remember one character whose job was to arrange the chairs before meetings. For eternity. As for Lori's insistence that her children and Tammy are very, very happy, I hope they are. But to hear it from Lori kind of feels like when your mother-in-law makes such a big deal about catering to your food allergy that you lose your appetite. This is a statement made in defiance, because the argument Lori's setting up here is that Tylee was miserable in life, and she's now happier that she's in heaven.
I have always mourned the loss of my loved ones, and I have lost many in this mortal world. However, I know them more than most people. I know where they are now and what they're doing.
I'm not 100% certain she said, I know them more than most. I think that's what I heard. What she's suggesting is that she knows what these people who have died feel and want better than we do because she can communicate with their spirits. The implication is, you can't tell me these people should still be alive because I know they prefer life in heaven. That's a rejection of the validity of her entire criminal case. It sounds like Lori would prefer to be in heaven as well.
I know how wonderful heaven is, and I'm homesick for it every single day. I know we all lived in heaven before we were born on earth, and we were all adult spirits in the heavenly realm. We chose to come to earth as mortals. Heaven is more wonderful than you can possibly imagine. I do not fear death, but I look forward to it. I did not want to return to my body when I was out of it. Even though my son Colby, who I adored more than anything, was only 6 years old at the time, and I was about to give birth to this new baby girl that I wanted so badly.
Not wanting to leave heaven to return to the body is a common trope in NDE memoirs, but Lori takes it to an extreme. Usually people report that they don't want to leave heaven while they're there, but Lori's implying she currently hates being alive. That doesn't entirely surprise me. Her cheeriness has always struck me as kind of shallow and forced, kind of like she's not just trying to convince us she isn't depressed, she's trying to convince herself. She was so animated and intense and frankly a little manic when she was talking to Nate Eaton, but I wonder if she's able to maintain that level of buoyancy when she's alone in her cell.
But it's an unfair system, and they probably will get convicted, and then we'll see each other at the prison, and we'll uplift each other there until Jesus comes. And when he comes, he's going to set everybody in the prisons free. And all those who are unjustly and wrongfully convicted, like me and like these others, we will be walking free on this earth, and we will be walking with Jesus, and that's what we're going to do.
Wait for the sign, then all prisoners will be released. You will perish in flame!
I was a young mother, and you would think I wouldn't want to leave my children, but as I stood in heaven, I did not want to go back. I thought they would be fine without me because I was peaceful and I was happy and I was home.
I found these two sentences the most revealing in this entire statement. She's talking about abandoning Colby and Tylee, and she says she thought they would be fine growing up without a mother because she was happy. How is Lori being happy in heaven going to improve the lives of her children on earth? And let's keep in mind the situation she thought she was leaving them in. She divorced Colby's father, and he had been adopted by Tylee's father, Joe Ryan. Lori has been claiming for close to 20 years now that Joe Ryan was inappropriate with both Colby and Tylee. Joe's lawyer says he was tried and acquitted of those charges, but that hasn't stopped Lori from repeating them publicly. She's saying that leaving her two small children in the care of a man she claims mistreated them in the worst possible way would have been fine because she was happy in heaven. That degree of self-centeredness blows my mind, and it's so demonstrative of the narcissistic tendency to see others as an extension of oneself. The kids will be happy no matter their circumstances because Lori's happy.
But then I was told by Jesus that I needed to go back and complete things that I had covenanted or promised to do before I was born. This caused me a lot of distress because I knew heaven was my real home, and I only wanted to be there. I was free from pain, emotional and physical. But then I was shown how I would help my children and others in the future. So ultimately, I did agree to go back to my body.
She would help her children. Like, by raising them? The way she paints herself here as this altruistic saint who returned from paradise to a life of constant suffering in order to help others, including the children that just a minute ago she was willing to abandon to a supposed monster in favor of her own happiness. Like I said, people like Chad and Lori have an extreme ability to believe contradictory things. They're the Zen koans of true crime.
Tylee has visited me. She is happy and very busy. Tylee is free now from all the pains of her life. Tylee suffered horrible physical pain her whole life. I sat with Tylee in the hospital year after year after year while she screamed in pain when the morphine wasn't even enough to take away the pain of her pancreatitis. I sat there while she cried and I held back her hair while she threw up. And I am the only person on this earth who knows how much Tylee suffered in her life. She had pain every single day. She never felt good. Her body did not work right. And I don't know if that was from complications from me dying while she was being born or something else, but she had a very difficult life. She was sexually abused by her own biological father since she was 3 years old, and she was forced by family court to go visit him for 10 years against her will. I fought for her in court. I protected her. I tried to protect her with my whole life. I tried to protect her. I worried about her every single day. Tylee had to get her GED because she couldn't go to school every day because she never felt good. She felt sick. Nobody knows this because Tylee, like myself, tries to put on a good front, tries to be a happy person, tries to have hope in life, tries to know that she's here for a purpose and that she has an eternal purpose to be on this earth. But I never stopped worrying about her. One of the times that Tylee came to me as a spirit after she died, she commanded me and she said to me, Stop worrying, Mom. We are fine. She knows how I worry and how I miss her.
There's a lot here. Dr. John over at Hidden True Crime believes Lori may have factitious disorder imposed on another, that Tylee's pancreatitis might actually have been the result of Lori poisoning her. That sort of thing is way above my pay grade, but I've been reading the book on the subject that he recommended, and some of it certainly sounds like Lori. I'd be very curious to know what kind of relationship she had with Tylee's pediatricians. Setting that possibility aside, what Lori's doing here is saying that Tylee's happy to be dead. And remember when Lori got mad that Judge Boreski wouldn't let her use Tylee's police interview during her trial, and Trina Kay pointed out that you can't kill someone and then get angry that they aren't available to testify on your behalf? I'm feeling the same way now. Like Lori just has no right to try to speak for Tylee, to claim that Tylee's spirit is on her side. I hope that Lori is exaggerating about what Tylee suffered. Tylee's brother Colby says Lori exaggerated Tylee's health conditions pretty dramatically. And it's worth noting that Lori said in her police interview that Tylee got her GED because she was simply too smart to waste her time in class.
And I was like, just take it, you're so smart. Let's just take it and see if you pass it. She passed it.
And got a really good score?
Yeah, she passed it with college ready.
I think that's entirely possible based only on the way Tylee spoke during her own police interview. She was a smart young woman. The more Lori talks, though, the more this story begins to fall apart in terms of believability. The fact that she's talking about Tylee in the present tense makes no sense. 4 years had passed by the time Lori made this statement. Even if Lori is referring to Tylee in the present tense because she's still convincing herself that she's communicating with Tylee's ghost, it doesn't make sense to say that Tylee tries to know that she's here for a purpose and that she has an eternal purpose to be on this earth. It ought to be, Tylee tries to know that she was here for a purpose and that she had an eternal purpose for being on this earth. And why would Tylee have to continue putting on a good front in heaven? I came up with a theory about why Lori makes this error. There's a common belief that people who've killed others often accidentally reveal themselves by referring to the person in the past tense too soon. And I have seen some cases, like Chris Watts, where that seems to have happened. I think Lori has heard about that, and she wanted to avoid looking guilty, but she overcompensated. She went too far putting things in present tense and ended up talking like Tylee is still alive. It's just a guess. And I have to say something about this creepy, almost campy, exaggerated delivery of the line, "She knows how I worry." It's so performative and syrupy. And why would Lori be worrying? What is the one place where you don't have to worry about your kids? Heaven. It's not the mall or your home or even Chuck E. Cheese. It's heaven. And given that Lori was so happy there that she was willing to abandon her 2 kids on Earth, I find it hard to believe she worries about Tylee being there. What is there to worry about?
The first time JJ visited me after he passed away, he put his arm around me and he said to me, "You didn't do anything wrong, Mom. I love you. And I know you loved me every minute of my life." JJ, Joshua Jackson, was an adult spirit. And he was very, very tall when he put his arm around me. He is busy. He is engaged. He has jobs that he does there. And he is happy where he is. His life was short, but JJ's life was meaningful. JJ was a wonderful person and touched the lives of everyone. And I adored him every minute of his life.
A lot of people have said it's weird that she claims JJ is an adult spirit, but that actually comes from the LDS Church, and it's common in LDS near-death experience accounts, so I don't find that strange. But for her to claim that JJ exonerated her, I mean, I try to imagine doing what Lori did and then standing up in front of the judge and all the people she hurt and saying this? And there are only two explanations I can think of. Either she doesn't have a normal emotional range, because if she did, she'd be brought to her knees by the shame of saying this, or else she actually believes it. And both possibilities are staggering.
My eternal friend, Tammy Daybell, has visited me on several occasions. She came to bring me peace and comfort, and I know that she is extremely busy helping her family, especially her children and grandchildren, and I have a great love for Tammy.
Her statement regarding Tammy is slightly less offensive, only because she doesn't claim that Tammy explicitly exonerated her. But the effect of Tammy visiting to bring Lori peace and comfort is essentially the same. I don't know if it's true that she and Chad and Tammy went to the temple together. I mean, that's what Lori says.
Tammy came to the temple with us too.
The three of you?
At some points, yes.
How many times?
Probably twice.
I'm curious if Tammy knew they were at the temple together. I'm inclined to believe the LDS commentators who've said that the way Lori talks about Tammy suggests spiritual polygamy. People have theorized that Chad was trying to talk Tammy into literal polygamy, and when that failed, he decided to end her life. My understanding is that because Chad and Lori weren't properly sealed, and no, having Jason Mao do it on the down low doesn't count, then Lori wouldn't be his wife in heaven. But that's deeper theology than I understand. And frankly, if there is a heaven, Chad and Lori aren't getting in anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
My beautiful children, Tylee Ashlyn and Joshua Jackson, rest safely this day in the arms of Jesus. My wonderful friend, Tammy Daybell, rests safely this day in the arms of Jesus. And I look forward to the day when we are all reunited and I too will rest with them in the arms of my Jesus.
This is the end of the statement. I don't know what to make of her claiming that she'll rest in the arms of her Jesus. I just don't know. Even Lori hasn't claimed that we each get our own personal Jesus. So that was Lori's first public statement. It was surreal. It was perverse. It was horrifying, and the girlish baby voice she delivered it in didn't help. Judge Boyce did a heroic job of controlling his facial expression during this statement and then gave her 3 life sentences. We're going to skip ahead 2 years now to Lori's second trial. This time she was charged with conspiracy to commit first-degree M in the death of her 4th husband, Charles Vallow, JJ's father and the man Colby considered his dad. Charles's death actually took place before the other 3, but Lori wasn't charged until after the children were found, when I guess Chandler decided to reopen Charles's case. Don't get me started on the way the Chandler police dropped the ball on this one. I took more pride in running a McDonald's drive-thru window when I was 15 than these cops took in investigating a man's death. If you've seen my video on the book Lori's father wrote, then you know he's a sovereign citizen, and sovcits almost always represent themselves in court. Lori decided to follow in her father's footsteps and represent herself, and also like her father, she ended up in prison. I have reason to believe that Lori despises her father, but I don't think she realizes how alike they are. I wanted to play her first sentencing statement in full, but I'll just play excerpts from the statements she made while acting as her own attorney, partly because Lori's speeches are very repetitive. Lori begins almost every sentence in this one with, "The evidence will show." She says it over 70 times, and it really starts to grate on the ear after the first couple dozen. When I transcribed this statement, I actually programmed Word to autocorrect TEWS to "the evidence will show," just so I could save finger strength. But we'll hit the highlights.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I have been charged with a crime, a serious crime. And the only question here is, did I commit this crime? Conspiracy. Conspiracy is an agreement between 2 or more people to commit a crime. Okay, so you see, okay. There has to be an agreement. There has to be a plan.
It's not a bad opening paragraph. I've been watching trials since I was 15, when NBC kept preempting Days of Our Lives for the OJ trial, and I can't count the number of times I've seen a lawyer begin their opening by explaining the legal definition of a crime. Unfortunately, Lori then launches into a timeline that is both unnecessarily detailed and covers far too long a time period.
The evidence in this case will show that Charles Vallow and I got married in February 2006. It will show that it was my 4th marriage and Charles' 3rd marriage. At that time, we each had 2 children. I had Colby, who was 9, and Tylee, who was 3. Charles had Cole, who was also 9, and Zach, who was 7. The evidence will show that our family moved from Austin, Texas to Chandler, Arizona in 2009. The evidence will show that Charles and I adopted our great-nephew, JJ, who was born in 2012. It will also show that Charles and I were married for over 13 years and were raising 5 children. The evidence will show that I was a licensed cosmetologist and worked as a hairstylist for 20 years while we lived in Austin, Texas.
I don't remember any evidence showing that Lori was a hairdresser. How is that relevant? She didn't kill Charles with poisoned hair dye. And I don't know why she mentioned this was her 4th marriage, especially given that Trina K had already told the jury that Lori got remarried after Charles died. It's not a great look, because it suggests to the jury that she might think of husbands as disposable.
The evidence will show that Charles and I had a happy marriage for 13 years. That he was, in fact, a baseball player, and that he played high school, college ball, and AAA ball, and that he was, in fact, a left-handed pitcher, a southpaw, they call him, but he was a right-handed batter, as could be attested to by anybody who knew Charles well and his high school baseball coach, Greg Davis.
Prosecutor Trina K brought up the fact that the baseball bat that Charles supposedly took from Tylee was found on the floor next to his right hand. Likely because Alex put it there after Charles died, and Alex didn't realize Charles was a lefty. And this evidence from Charles's former coach might have been good for Lori, except that she never got Coach Greg Davis on the stand. No one who testified said Charles was a right-handed batter, including his sister Kay, who said the exact opposite. So in fact, the evidence didn't show this. Even worse, for Lori, that is, I noticed during her police interview that when Lori was mimicking Charles, acting out him threatening her with the bat, she was holding it over her left shoulder.
When you said when you were going around and he was coming at you with the bat, how was he holding the bat?
Just like that. Like backwards. Almost in one arm.
Like he was swinging it backwards? He would have done
Like he would have swung it backwards at me, not frontwards.
Okay, yeah.
He was a professional baseball player.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how a left-handed batter holds a bat.
The evidence will show that Tylee was 3 years old when Charles and I got married, and that when she became a teenager, the relationship between Tylee and her stepfather, Charles, became so difficult that Tylee and Charles had to seek a therapist, a family therapist, to stop them from fighting. The evidence will show that together, Charles and Tylee met with this therapist after we moved back to the mainland in 2017.
I was horrified, as I'm sure many of you were, when Lori called Tylee a nightmare during her Nate Eaton interview, and then claimed Charles thought she was a brat.
Tylee was a nightmare. Charles thought she was a brat.
Talk about watching projection in real time.
The evidence will show that Charles and Tylee's fighting increased greatly in January of 2019 when Charles and I temporarily separated. The evidence will show that several people witnessed these terrible arguments between Tylee and Charles that increased to physical in 2019. Charles and Tylee had major increasing arguments, 2 in February of 2019, 1 of March in 2019, which was captured on video, 1 in May of 2019, 1 in June of 2019, and then the worst of all in July 2019.
Except, again, no evidence of any of this was presented. If there's a video of Tylee and Charles fighting, where is it? Who has it? By this point in the statement, it seemed obvious to me that Lori wanted to claim that Tylee was responsible for Charles's death. She's complained several times now about how when she goes to trial, she just isn't allowed to tell her story.
You thought they get to tell their side of the story, what they think happened. You get to go in and tell your side of the story of what happened, and then the jury gets to decide. And that's not what happens. That's not what happens at all. And it's so sad and disappointing that that's...
That's because trials require evidence. And despite Lori promising that the evidence would show this, none of it ever did. The only person who even testified about Tylee and Charles's relationship was his sister Kay, and she seemed to think it was normal teenager conflicts. I gather it was somewhat worse than that Tylee didn't especially like Charles, but a lot of that was probably Lori's fault. When you have a family member who's constantly manipulating everyone around her, I'm not sure anyone in that family truly knows how they feel about each other.
The evidence will show that during the months of June and July, that my husband, Charles Vallow, began to send me threatening text messages. These messages were seen by my sister Summer, and that worried her.
I try to keep an open mind when I watch a trial, even if I know there's damning evidence against the defendant. I'm a big fan of Peter at The Lawyer You Know, and I try to follow his example when it comes to fairness and the presumption of innocence. I watch trials as if I'm a jury member. Even with a case like this, where I know a lot about it, I'm open to having my mind changed. So if these threatening messages exist, I want to see them. But Lori has never produced them. She has every conceivable type of download from Charles's phone. I assume she has evidence from her own phone, and she still can't produce them. And her sister, who supposedly saw them, refused to testify on Lori's behalf. The closest Lori has ever come to producing the messages is claiming in her police interview that Charles texted her, "You're going down." My sister has said worse to me while playing Monopoly. She likes to trash talk. "You're going down" could have referred to the inevitable court case when they divorced. It could have referred to Lori losing her temple recommend. It could have meant almost anything. What was Lori thinking when she gave this opening statement? She was still trying to get the raw data from Charles's phone, so maybe she thought there was a chance she might still be able to produce the messages, but she knew she hadn't been able to serve Summer with a subpoena. And that brings up a whole host of other questions. Does Lori not know where her family is living? I believe she was also trying to subpoena her parents, whom I think have moved to Utah, based on Barry's endless court battles over a Utah speeding ticket. Doesn't Lori have their address? Didn't she discuss testifying with them? It raises the possibility that they've cut Lori off, which is surprising to me. But if there's one thing I hear about them over and over, it's that they're very concerned with appearances. And we read in Barry's book how he believes that public humiliation would be enough to bring down an entire government agency. I wonder if they felt like testifying on Lori's behalf wasn't a good look for them. The only member of Lori's family who did testify was her brother Adam, and he testified for the prosecution. We finally get into the meat of Lori's argument. I assume this was only allowed because the prosecution didn't have a way to present it, because it's basically Lori testifying about what happened the day Charles died.
The evidence will show that on the morning of July 11th, that Tylee was asleep in her room and my brother Alex was asleep in the guest room. The evidence will show that when Charles entered the house, only JJ and I were awake and present. The evidence will show that after we put JJ in the rental car, that Charles came back into the residence to receive his phone, leaving JJ in the front seat of the rental car with the engine running. He was 7 years old. The evidence will show that Charles began to scream at me when I refused to hand him his phone. The evidence will show that Charles' screaming woke up Tylee and Alex. The evidence will show that Tylee came out of her room with a bat to protect me, her mother, from her stepfather, Charles Vallow.
Like a lot of people, I don't understand why Lori didn't just give Charles his phone. It was his phone. I was aware while rewatching her police interview that her entire defense boiled down to, Alex shot Charles because I was committing a crime against Charles and he didn't like that. And I'm going to agree with the majority that she probably held onto the phone to provoke a fight, because all of this was planned. In fact, I'm pretty sure that the reason Alex stayed at Lori's house the night before is that she was expecting Charles to show up then, and they were planning to kill him that night.
So he didn't bother me last night, which I was surprised. I was expecting kind of an ambush for him to kind of like come over or be just mean and say, "That's my house, I'm on the lease, I'm going to stay here," kind of thing. Because that's kind of his macho attitude.
They didn't realize he had a date with a much nicer woman. This excerpt includes the first of 3 attempts Lori makes to throw shade at Charles for leaving JJ in the car. But if she had just given him his phone back when he asked for it, Charles could have been in and out of the house in 15 seconds. Lori begins crying here, and I'm not sure why. Is she upset by the idea that Tylee had to defend her? If Lori were someone else, I would think that was possible. But here it just feels kind of fake, because the timing makes no sense.
The evidence will show that Tylee and Charles fought over the bat, and that after a struggle over the bat, Tylee fell onto the ground, and Charles lifted up the bat to hit Tylee with the bat. The evidence will show that Alex then intervened to protect Tylee from being hit with the bat. He did not have a gun. He was not wearing a shirt. He was pulling up his jeans because he just woke up and came into the room where he heard the screaming.
Thanks for that image, Lori. Those are evocative but thoroughly unnecessary details. And really, Lori shouldn't have been allowed to bring them up unless she was planning to testify. Because of the 5 people who were in the house that morning, she's the only one left alive. This doesn't match the statement Alex gave the police either. He says he was already up for the day and that Tylee came out of her room after he got involved. Also, I went back and watched the police body cam footage of them arriving at the house, and Alex was wearing jeans, but he'd also taken the time to find a shirt at some point between shooting his brother-in-law and greeting the cops.
The evidence will show that Tylee and I had both run outside without shoes.
As we all know, the evidence did not show that. You can see Lori walking into Walgreens with shoes on.
Did I grab a tissue?
Yes.
The evidence will show that I drove the children through the Burger King drive-thru that Charles had promised JJ.
She just can't resist taking little digs at Charles throughout this. Charles couldn't take JJ to Burger King because he was dead. How is that his fault? One thing I've noticed in trials and interviews where the killer speaks is that they often can't resist these sorts of subtle jabs. They consistently evince contempt for the victim. This section is followed by a long narrative about what happened afterward. They took JJ to school. They went back to the house. They spoke to this person. They spoke to that person. None of it seems especially relevant, but I think Lori was just trying to stress that she did everything the cops told her to do. We're going to pick up again after the police interviewed everyone and then drove them back to the house.
The evidence will show that at the time, Detective Inklin asked Tylee and myself if we had Charles' cell phone. Tylee retrieved Charles' cell phone from the rental car and gave it to Detective Inklin at 3:11 p.m. on July 11th, 2019. And at that time, Charles' phone was placed in the custody of Chandler police detectives. The evidence will show that Detective Inklin asked us if we knew the passcode on Charles' phone, which Tylee proceeded to give to Detective Inklin.
Tylee and Charles had a terrible, contentious relationship, but Tylee knew the passcode to his phone? That doesn't jive for me. You don't give your phone passcode to someone you have a terrible relationship with.
As the state has mentioned, they're alleging that insurance money was my motive. Social Security was my motive. Spouses having insurance policies is not a crime. Collecting Social Security is not a crime. Self-defense is not a crime. A family tragedy is not a crime. It's a tragedy. Thank you.
What Lori fails to acknowledge here is that no one is suggesting that having life insurance is a crime. She wasn't charged with that. But one of Lori's favorite manipulation tactics is minimizing, and she's using it here. That's the end of the opening statement. I was actually pretty impressed with the statement overall. Despite her excruciating overuse of "the evidence will show," she had a theme with which she opened and closed, and a clear timeline. That said, I knew that once people began testifying, everything would fall apart. And it did. But if you didn't know anything about Lori, and this was the first you heard from her, I can see where the story might have made sense. And that's an interesting testament to Lori's ability to manipulate. She's capable of weaving lies and distortions into a narrative that, on the surface, looks cogent and plausible. It isn't until you look closer that you realize it's all lies. Less than 2 weeks later, Lori gave her closing argument, during which she replaced the phrase, "the evidence will show," with, "we learned in this trial." The repetition is, again, pretty excruciating. There were numerous objections from the state while she delivered this argument, because Lori didn't testify, didn't call a single witness, and didn't enter a single piece of evidence. But she tries to sneak a lot of testimony into her argument, the same way she did while cross-examining witnesses. She begins like this.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the state of Arizona has the 100% burden of proving that I committed a crime, a grievous crime, conspiracy to commit premeditated of my husband, Charles Vallow. The state has the burden of proving to you that this event was not self-defense. In your jury instruction under the instruction, use of force and crime prevention, the last line reads, if the state fails to carry this burden, then you must find the defendant not guilty.
She goes on to cite 4 more sections of the jury instructions, which also becomes repetitive. This repetition of rhetorical devices and phrases is something we saw in her father's book as well. While we don't know for certain what her father may have been diagnosed with, repetitive speech is associated with schizophrenia and other thought disorders. I don't know if it can manifest quite like this, but seems possible. Alternately, and I don't mean this to be offensive, the Book of Mormon is written with the same kind of repetition. In fact, Mark Twain joked that if the phrase, "and it came to pass," were cut from the Book of Mormon, Joseph Smith would have published a pamphlet instead. So I think it's possible that Lori was trying to evoke scripture, the same way Chad tried to mimic a general conference speaking voice when he spoke in public.
So let's look at what we've learned in this trial. We learned that a shooting occurred and that 911 was called, that law enforcement was notified. We learned that fire, EMS, and Chandler police arrived at the scene. We learned that my brother, Alex Cox, came out of the house with his hands up as directed by 911 and was questioned by the police in the driveway. We learned that I came up with my daughter Tylee, and we were told to wait by the car until police would speak with us. We learned from Detective Inklin on the stand that we asked for Tylee's medication from the house for her panic attacks, but it was not given to her.
She goes through the entire timeline again, starting with the 911 call. Frankly, I'm not sure why. The fact that the police assumed this was self-defense at the time doesn't have a great deal of bearing on the case, but that seems to be the majority of her argument. It's almost as if she believes that if other people thought it appeared to be self-defense, it must have been self-defense, as if the truth is determined by the perception of outsiders. She makes several comments, like the one we just heard about the police refusing to let her into the house to get Tylee's medication, that seem intended to make the police look bad, but later she's going to contradict herself about the police's behavior.
Most of my police interview is admitted, though, into evidence in this exhibit. It's number 286. And I would encourage you to watch that entire interview when you start your deliberations. It is important. It is important for you to determine for yourselves my demeanor and not listen to anyone else. You can see it with your own eyes and hear it with your own ears. We heard from several witnesses that because this event was almost 6 years ago, that their memories of the events and statements were probably better back then. Well, my police interview happened that very morning, and I told the police the events from my perspective at that time. It is admitted into evidence and will answer many of your questions.
I'm confused about why she was so adamant that the jury watch her police interview. I rewatched it twice. The interview isn't good for Lori's case. It doesn't back her up. The story she told Detective Inklin contradicts what she's arguing now, and the fact that she doesn't realize that appears, to me at least, as a non-mental health professional, to indicate some sort of disordered thinking. How does she not realize how bad the interview is for her? I keep thinking about Charlie Adelson's testimony at his trial. If you've somehow missed the decade-long saga of the Adelsons and the late, great Dan Markel, the short version is that Charlie Adelson took out a hit on his former brother-in-law because Charlie's mother wanted to bring her grandkids to Miami. At Charlie's trial, he testified and claimed that some gang members had killed his brother-in-law and then tried to extort him over it, which isn't how extortion works. But I was impressed with Charlie's testimony. He knew exactly what evidence the state had against him, and he came up with a story that, though implausible, was possible, and he managed to fabricate explanations for every piece of evidence. He could explain away every incriminating text message and recorded call, every check he paid to his ex-girlfriend who set things up. He gave quite a performance, and it was obvious that he'd spent his time in jail memorizing the details of his case and creating this narrative that explained it all. There are two major differences between Charlie's trial and Lori's. The first is that the evidence in Charlie's trial was overwhelming. In Lori's, it wasn't nearly as strong as it could have been because the Chandler police did an absolutely terrible job. I don't understand why, but they took Lori and Alex at face value. Even Lori's going to complain about the shoddy investigation. And for once, she's not wrong. The second difference is that Charlie Adelson isn't delusional. He may be a psychopath, but he doesn't have the critical thinking deficits Lori has. And Lori's a smart woman, she really is. But she, and her father, seem to struggle with basic rationality. It makes no sense to claim that you ran out of the house with no shoes on when you know the cops have a video of you wearing shoes after running out of the house. I don't understand how she thought that was going to work out for her. And it's especially baffling because the shoe thing had no bearing on the case. She appears to have thrown it in there to get sympathy from the jury. And it didn't occur to her that being caught in a lie would seriously damage her credibility. She can't make that leap. She can't understand that the fact that she's a proven liar is more important to jurors than the story she wants to tell. I suspect she spent most of her life arguing with people about reality.
You did not see Tylee's interview, but we did learn from Detective Inklin that she did an interview that morning as well. You did not see Alex's interview, but we learned that Alex was interviewed that morning by Detective Moffett, the original case agent, whom we did not hear from in this trial.
During her interview with Nate Eaton, she brought up the fact that the state didn't call Detective Moffett.
I had about 5 interviews with one of the cops who said, I have to get Lori on something. I have to find something to charge her with. I have him saying this on video.
Which cops?
Okay, Detective Moffett. Guess what happens? So I have 4 of those are my exhibits. I'm waiting for Detective Moffett to get on the stand. The state says they're going to put on Detective Moffett. Guess who they don't put on at all?
Moffett.
Detective Moffett.
So why didn't she call Detective Moffat? Unfortunately, Nate didn't ask her. She presents this issue as evidence that the justice system is unfair and stacked against defendants, which is true, but here it's just more evidence of her victim mentality.
We learned in this trial that Alex fully cooperated with law enforcement. We learned that my daughter Tylee fully cooperated with law enforcement. We learned that I fully cooperated with law enforcement. We learned that law enforcement treated all of us that day kindly and courteously on July 11th, 2019. That law enforcement treated us that day like this was self-defense.
This seems to be the crux of her self-defense. She and Alex didn't act guilty, so they must not be guilty. As I mentioned earlier, her family is very concerned with appearances. Combined with Lori's lack of critical thinking ability, this seems to lead to a belief that appearances are reality, that somehow appearances determine reality after the fact. Also, she's talking out of both sides of her mouth. She says that the police denied Tylee her anxiety medication, but also that she and Tylee were treated kindly and courteously. What's kind about refusing to let a traumatized teenager take her panic attack meds? Again, there's this disconnect in Lori's thinking, as if she can see that this means this and that means that, but she can't see how this and that affect each other. It's like she only ever looks at a single piece of the puzzle. If one piece shows that the police were kind and courteous, and another piece says they were incompetent jerks, those pieces don't belong in the same puzzle. Unless you're Lori.
We learned in this trial that Chandler Police Department neglected to do a thorough investigation. We learned that they did not swab Alex's hands for gunpowder residue. We learned that they did not swab my hands for gunpowder residue. We learned that they did not swab Tylee's hands for gunpowder residue. We learned that they did not luminol the gun. We learned that they did not luminol the bat. They did not test the DNA on the bat that they collected. They did not test the floorboard. They did not test the projectile. They did not test my husband's shirt. They did not search the rental car. They did not search any of our 3 cars that were there at the scene. They did not test the gun until over 5 years later.
Like I said, Lori's not wrong that the police did an incompetent investigation. People should have been fired over this. If they had properly investigated, Lori and Alex would have been arrested, and Tylee, JJ, and Tammy would still be alive. That said, Lori does not understand the concept of testing and why or how it's done. There was no need to luminol the sidearm because everyone agreed it was the weapon used. Tests are expensive. They're done to find things out, but all the things they could show were already known in this case. This complaint that the police didn't test the floorboard blew me away. Test it for what? There's no test to prove that a bullet hit a piece of flooring. I guess they could have tested Charles's shirt to prove that a bullet could rip through it, but Lori's claim that it could have stopped a bullet because it was made of bamboo was so laughable that I'm sure no one ever thought to preemptively disprove it. I love bamboo fabric. I have bamboo sheets, bamboo socks, bamboo underwear. It's my favorite fabric. It wouldn't stop a paring knife, let alone a bullet. I feel like Lori thinks the cops had some kind of tricorder and could have scanned objects and just known everything about them. There are also 2 interesting, suggestive things on the list of tests Lori believes the cops should have run. First, why would the police have swabbed Tylee's hands for gunshot residue? Lori and Alex both said she was outside when Charles was shot. So did Tylee. But Lori is implying that it would have been done by a competent investigation. This supports my belief that, had she been allowed to say whatever she wanted, Lori would have blamed Tylee for shooting Charles. Now, I might be wrong. Maybe she was just coming up with as long a list as she could of things the cops should have done, but that's how I read it. That might also be the explanation for why she says that the cars should have been searched, although that seems to come out of nowhere. and it makes me wonder if there was incriminating evidence in one of the cars. I wonder if she had some guilty knowledge that led her to include this on the list. Second, Lori's lying. The police did swab Alex's hand for GSR. It's on tape. If you watch his police interview, which is only like 20 minutes long, the police leave him alone in the interview room afterward. He sleeps for a while, just like Lori, which is wild to me. And then a tech comes in and takes photos and swabs his hands. She doesn't say specifically what she's swabbing them for, so maybe it's something other than GSR, but I can't think of what else they'd be looking for. And this actually explains to me one of the mysteries of Lori's strategy. In pretrial motions, she kept trying to call a police tech named Tammy, not to be confused with Tammy Daybell, who has apparently since been removed from her position or had to leave her job. I've heard rumors, but I don't really know why. She wasn't available to testify in the end, so it didn't end up mattering. I have a theory that Lori wanted to blame Tylee for the shooting, but needed to explain why Alex had GSR on his hands. So her plan was to call this tech, Tammy, and then try to characterize her as incompetent or maybe even corrupt, using whatever caused Tammy's employment issues. That's just a theory. I don't even know for certain that the tech who swabbed Alex's hands was named Tammy, but it would fit with my other theories about this case. I could be totally off base, though. I mean, I didn't know you were allowed to tell bald-faced lies during your closing argument either, so clearly I'm not well educated on these matters.
This is an attempt by the state to try to retrofit a crime that doesn't exist. This event was not a crime. It was a tragedy. Don't let them turn my family tragedy into a crime.
Her delivery is so whiny here, it sounds like she's throwing a tantrum. She returns to the theme of her opening statement, which, under other circumstances, I would applaud. That's a solid technique. Unfortunately, the evidence didn't support her. She gave a decent opening statement and a less decent closing argument, but there was no testimony in the middle to support her. The whole case was like an Oreo with no filling. Just one dry disappointment.
The only interview the state entered into evidence is mine. So I encourage you to go watch it. I told you just what happened that day, just the way it happened. The state put forth a bunch of evidence in this trial in an effort to make you dislike me, to try to attack my character, so that you would just say guilty no matter what evidence they showed you. But only you get to decide. The state put up witnesses that had zero knowledge of a conspiracy. The state did not show you evidence of an agreement to commit murder. They showed you evidence of a family tragedy, and then they showed you the sad effects of a family torn apart because of that tragedy. That's all.
I really want to know what she thought that interview was going to show that would help her. And frankly, I think that Lori's behavior in court did more to make the jury dislike her than anything the state put forth. When she went after Nancy Joe, I thought, she just showed her true self. This woman is a pit bull with blonde curls. She says that the state showed the sad effects of a family torn apart because of that tragedy. But that never happened. Unless she considered the investigation itself the sad effects. The state never put on any evidence about what happened in the weeks or months after this crime. Charles was shot in the mid-morning, and the investigation was literally over by dinner time, so I think the only sad thing about the investigation is its brevity. And she ends with this final whisper that I had to turn the captions on to catch. That's all. It's very dramatic. Needless to say, she was convicted. In less than 3 hours, and that includes the hour the jury spent watching her police interview, as she requested. A month later, Lori stood trial again, and she again acted as her own attorney, just like her father taught her to do, because neither one of them can learn their lesson the first time. This time, she was charged with the attempted M of her niece's estranged husband, Brandon. Lori kinda seems like she was falling apart emotionally between the two trials. When she heard the guilty verdict in Charles's death, she went perfectly still. And I thought at the time, wow, she's actually shocked. It was an unusually genuine reaction from Lori, which you can tell because it was pretty understated. I think that verdict hit her hard, because who thinks that a goddess in charge of her own defense won't prevail? If Athena was wrongly charged, I'd expect her to be able to get herself acquitted too. I guess that being convicted shook Lori's sense of self and her belief in her own infallibility. Her reaction was fairly predictable. She claimed to be a victim. She managed to get the trial delayed by a week by either faking sickness or exaggerating a minor illness. We don't know the details. She argued with the judge to the point that he declared he would only respond to her motions in writing. I want to play a bit from one of the hearings that led to that ruling.
Your Honor, in light of the juror misconduct or the alleged juror misconduct, I have to object to us having so much information go out about my personal information in that jury questionnaire. Do you not think that was a problem?
What personal information?
The state versus Lori Daybell.
What's the name of the case?
Yeah, but you don't put that on anyone else's questionnaire. I don't know one other person that's ever had that questionnaire ever put out with their name on it. They just don't do it.
Do it in every trial I've done.
Then the people are just going to Google it,
We're
and then
not-
we're going to have the same exact problem we had getting a jury for that case.
We
We're going to
don't
have the same exact problem.
Are you done? Are you just going to keep? Okay. How do we screen for if people have heard about you if we don't include your name? Do you have a response to that?
I'm just saying, you gave them the name, and they're just going to Google it.
They're instructed not to Google it. All right. And if you'll recall, when we had all the jurors come in person, one of the first questions I asked them in the afternoon was, who has looked up this case since you filled out the questionnaire? And we had 2 or 3 people raise their hand, and those people were excused. So I have to include your name to screen out for the people that know about your case. And we released about 100 jurors last time because of their answers to that. If we don't include your name, that's 100 extra jurors we have to go through in person and ask if they know you. And in fact, that increases the risk of tainting the rest of the jury pool if we have someone stand up and say, yeah, I know about her case in Idaho where blah, 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 in front of the rest of the jurors. That'll burn the whole panel. We'll have to start over. So I'm going to include your name in the questionnaire. I don't think there was any other personal information or background information about you in that questionnaire other than your name. So was there any other issues you had with the questionnaire?
No, Your Honor.
So the schedule will be, we'll meet 1 p.m. to go over those answers on the 29th. On the 30th, we'll meet at 10, then June 9th to June 13th, and if need be, June 23rd.
Your Honor,
Yes.
I would have to ask that you would recuse yourself from the obvious personal bias that you have against me and send us to master calendar for this scheduling of a trial.
I actually found the moment when she tossed her glasses on the table and said, "No, Your Honor," incredibly chilling.
No, Your Honor.
I think I'm the only one who was disturbed by it, but I'd never heard that coldness in her voice before. For me, that was another moment when she revealed a part of herself that completely contradicted her public persona. I had a visceral fear reaction, and I was immediately glad that I was watching the hearing after it happened, because I knew that meant she hadn't gone on a bloody rampage through the courtroom. But I was scared for everyone there for a moment, because this Lori was someone I could see ordering the deaths of her husband and children. You know, Chad's writing often swung between the extremes of deadly violence and corny, goofy humor, and I think that's something he and Lori share. Because while this hearing frightened me, it was also pretty hilarious. Watching Judge Boreski try to deal with her was just a comedy of the absurd.
You denied every single one of my motions since for a year and a half that I've been here. Every single one of my motions has been denied. And have any of those motions not have merit? You've denied every single motion.
I think I was here this morning about 15 minutes ago when I granted your motion to meet with your attorneys over the lunch hour. I have granted other motions of yours. Okay?
That's the first motion that you've ever granted
Well,
in my behalf.
file motions that have a legal basis and I might grant them.
So you're saying none of my motions have had merit?
Not many, no.
No, Lori, not a single one of your motions has had any legal merit. Even I knew that.
Are you not going to recuse yourself?
No, I'm denying your motion.
As I said, it's clear that Lori is beginning to fall apart now as she gives this second opening statement. This one is far less structured and far less coherent than her opening in the trial prior to this one. Her sentence structure is also worse, and her logic is logicking less than ever, if that's possible. It's also hard to follow the statement because there were so many objections. I think Trina K was trying to destabilize Lori further, and she succeeded.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, here we are at trial. And the judicial system can be difficult to understand at times.
We're off to a rough start. Lori is the absolute empress of projection, and I think what she's doing here is assuming that the jury is going to have the same difficulty understanding the law that she's having.
There are laws and rules and statutes that govern how things will proceed in this trial. You yesterday got to hear the preliminary jury instruction, so you kind of got an order of how things are going to go. In order for someone to be charged with a crime, as I have been,
Your Honor, I'm going to object to argument versus an opening statement.
I'll remind the defendant, an opening statement should be a preview of what is to be expected at trial. So go ahead.
that law enforcement presents evidence that they gather, and the state prosecutors are going to present that to you. Sometimes the state charges the defendant with a crime. They have charged me with a crime, a very serious crime. Sometimes they take the allegations to a grand jury to decide if the defendant
I'm
should
going
be
to
charged.
object again, Your Honor. Improper
That's,
argument. Asked to strike.
Hold on. The jury should disregard that last comment. How the charges arrived here are not for the jury's consideration. The prior proceedings are not for the jury's consideration. Please proceed.
You can see how this is going to go. And why is Lori trying to educate the jury about the judicial process? The legal system is very careful to only give jurors the information they need to do their jobs, because you shouldn't need a full legal education in order to sit on a jury. It's possible that Lori is deliberately trying to confuse them, but I think it's more likely that she sat down to write this and just blurted out her train of thought, the same way her father did when he wrote his book. Her previous opening statement appears to have been edited, but this one feels very stream of consciousness.
The state or the prosecution will then take the information gathered, the evidence from law enforcement, and present to you a story, a theory, their hypothesis of what happened. In this case, the prosecutor was not present during this alleged crime. The Gilbert Police Department was not present during this alleged crime. So it is their job to fill in the gaps, make up a theory, and present it to you, the jury, at trial. This is their job. They are not witness to the actual events because they weren't there that day with Brandon at the house when this alleged shooting occurred.
So now we're starting to hear what Lori wants to argue, that there was no crime, possibly even no shooting, and that the police and prosecution invented a crime because that's their job. Obviously, that makes no sense beyond that Lori appears to be projecting again. She wasn't part of a conspiracy. Brandon and the cops and Trina K were the conspiracy. She's also presenting a bizarre false standard by implying that because the police and the prosecutors didn't witness the shooting, that means it never took place. Does Lori believe people routinely commit crimes in front of the police and the prosecutors?
This case is about a conspiracy. And a conspiracy is when two or more people make an agreement to commit a crime. They have to willingly and knowingly participate. Conspiracy is an ancient word that appears in the Bible on many occasions. Judas conspired against Jesus with the chief priests for
I'm going to
30 pieces of silver.
object to, unless this is being presented at trial, I'm not sure that this is appropriate opening.
Actually, according to Merriam-Webster, the word conspiracy was first used in the 14th century. Maybe Lori means that conspiracy is an ancient concept? Bringing in religion might be an attempt to portray herself as faithful during a case that, to my surprise, barely mentioned religion. But my guess is that's just how she thinks. Reports are that she spent most of her time in jail reading scripture, dancing in her cell, and texting with Chad. Note here that she's comparing herself to Jesus.
Cain conspired against Abel, his brother.
What drew my attention, though, is that after defining conspiracy, she gives an example that doesn't comport with that definition. Cain conspired against Abel, his brother. That relies on a different meaning of conspire than the legal definition, which the story of Cain and Abel doesn't fit. Cain plotted against Abel, but he didn't form a conspiracy with one or more other persons, which Arizona's legal definition of conspiracy requires. This appears to have gone right over Lori's head. Then she talks for a while about how she's known Brandon for a long time and they always had a good relationship, so she certainly couldn't have tried to kill him for his life insurance. Like the police as witness thing, it's another not great argument, because not a lot of people get killed for their life insurance by strangers.
In this case, you will hear Brandon himself tell you that someone shot his car. You will learn in this testimony that Brandon was not hurt. You will learn that he wasn't even sure what had happened. But you will hear that Brandon immediately blamed me. Which begs the question, was I an enemy to Brandon? That is news to me, and hopefully by the end of this trial, we will all have some answers to that question.
I don't even know what's going on here. Little old me was just going through life, breaking up Brandon's marriage by insisting to his wife that he was a closet homosexual, and suddenly he doesn't like me. I don't get it. I thought we were best buds. This seems to be another example of Lori's black and white thinking. I would have found Lori much more credible if she had said, yeah, I was angry at Brandon for hiding the fact that he was gay from his wife, but I didn't hate him enough to kill him. Instead, Lori can't bring herself to admit they've ever had a single conflict. And, as will come out later during his testimony, that is news to Brandon.
In this case, you will learn that Brandon had called 911, and Gilbert Police did respond. You will learn that Brandon speaks of a puke green Jeep, and then he offers the officers a camo green color that he's speaking of on his phone. He says a green Jeep.
In a different case, Lori might have been able to make use of Brandon's confusion about the color of the Jeep to support a larger narrative, although I don't think there's a great deal of difference between puke green and camo green. But this is basically all the evidence Lori has. What I want to point out is how Lori's ability to express herself is failing. Then he offers the officers a camo green color that he's speaking of on his phone. What she actually means to convey is that Brandon looked the car's VIN number up on his phone and discovered that the Jeep was gray, so he changed his story. Lori's ability to explain a fairly simple idea has deteriorated to the point that it's concerning. It's also concerning that she's going to bring this up again later in her opening statement, and I'm not sure she knows that she's inserted it into the timeline twice.
You will learn that Brandon was not particularly satisfied with the investigation that Gilbert Police was conducting, so he did his own investigation, hiring his own private investigator to follow his wife, Melanie Boudreau. You will find out that Brandon had access to the VIN number of a Jeep and gave it to the police. You will find out that after that event, he quickly changed his story from a camo green Jeep to a gray Jeep. You will then learn that Brandon continued to provide information he was personally finding out to Detective Pillar, the case agent in this case. You will learn that Detective Pillar and Brandon discussed through email how they can demonstrate Melanie's financial gain if Brandon were to have died around October 2nd, 2019. This is what a conspiracy looks like. Two people trying to set up another person for a crime.
Okay, so if this is what a conspiracy looks like, then what does an investigation look like? Does Lori expect Brandon to answer the police's questions with, "Figure it out for yourself"? Are victims of crime not allowed to tell the police anything? Are the police not allowed to ask victims of crime for evidence? Lori's spin on this is amazing.
Brandon and Alex also had a good relationship until this accusation. They saw each other frequently at all of our family parties and get-togethers and would often be seen laughing and talking. Alex was a comedian who kept our family laughing. Alex passed away in December 2019 of natural causes, so he is not here to defend himself.
And I'm going to object again to that as well, since he's not party to this.
Yeah, Alex sure did keep his family laughing with his racist jokes and stand-up routines about the time he put a taser to his brother-in-law's testicles. No one funny has ever committed a crime. I was actually surprised Lori brought up the fact that Alex had died, because Trina K objected to the mention of it during Lori's last trial. Lori knew it wasn't relevant and would result in an objection, and that the objection would be sustained. And yet, she brought it up again here. It's more of that malignant tenacity. Lori next complains about how, even though she has alleged co-conspirators, she's the only one charged with a crime. It's an interesting complaint to make, because it sort of implies that even if she's guilty, it isn't fair that she's the only one being prosecuted. By describing herself as a victim within the conspiracy, she almost admits she was part of a conspiracy. Listen carefully to the first sentence of this next excerpt. I think she accidentally replaces the word event with invent in some kind of Freudian slip. I might be reading too much into it, but that suggests to me that she's convinced herself that the shooting never happened, that it's all an invention of Brandon and the police. Or maybe they're just similar vowels.
And I want you to look carefully and determine if this invent was a crime at all. Did a shooting actually occur? Only Brandon claims that it did. Only Brandon names me and Alex. You will learn that Brandon himself did own a gun. You will learn that Brandon knew how to shoot his gun. You will learn that Brandon and Melanie were going through a divorce. And you will learn that even though Brandon is the one who actually filed for a divorce, he was blaming me for his divorce. You will learn that the information that the Gilbert Police Department and Detective Pillar, the case agent on this case, learned about me and my brother Alex was from Brandon Boudreaux. You will learn that Brandon and Detective Pillar communicated frequently and were on a first-name basis. I want you to look closely at the motivation of Brandon and the Gilbert Police Department, because I'm the only one charged with a crime, and I need you to decipher what really happened here, because I'm the only one who's being asked to pay a consequence for this crime.
And again, Your Honor, I'm going to ask to object and strike that.
Sustained.
Lori's claim is that Brandon unfairly blamed her for his divorce from her niece. So he took his own sidearm and shot his own car, and then lied to the police about seeing Alex shooting at him from the back of Tylee's Jeep. And Lori's evidence of this is that Brandon and Detective Pillar called each other by their first names, and Brandon couldn't remember what color the Jeep was. Sure. In an interesting coincidence, it turns out that this Jeep had a type of paint that was intended to appear different colors in different lighting. The car that the hitman in the Adelson case rented had a similar type of paint, It looked green in some light and silver in others. We might need to rethink the use of this paint. There's some curious logic in the last sentence of this excerpt. I want you to look closely at the motivation of Brandon and the Gilbert Police Department, because I'm the only one charged with a crime. Is she trying to imply that if Melanie and Alex had been charged, then Brandon and the police's motives wouldn't matter? That makes no sense. She continues, and I need you to decipher what really happened here, because I'm the only one who's being asked to pay a consequence for this crime. I'm not sure what to make of this other than it's Lori playing the victim, yet again, which she loves to do. But it seems to be especially paramount in her mind at this time. During the trial, she tried to throw her supposedly beloved niece under the bus, and I actually agree that Melanie should have been charged. But I think that if she had been, that only would have resulted in a stronger case against Lori, so I'm not sure why Lori is arguing for it. I'm also distracted by her use of the phrase, pay a consequence. You can't pay a consequence for something you didn't do. That's not how we use that term. Hence the popularity of the phrase, well, if it isn't the consequences of my actions. I think there's a bit of an embedded confession here. At this point in the opening, Lori goes right off the rails and starts asking bizarre, almost philosophical questions, some of which she then answers incorrectly.
You will hear many references during this trial about the state versus Lori Daybell. Well, who is the state? The state are the prosecutors.
I object to argument and relevance.
Sustain.
Who is the state? The state isn't a person. The prosecutors represent the state. Okay, Lori doesn't understand that, whatever. But why would she want the jury to contemplate that question? How is that going to help her case? As part of her attempt to cast herself as a victim of injustice, she's taken her argument to a weird philosophical level that not only appears to be legally inappropriate, but also does nothing for her. How did she think this would land with the jurors? My God, the state is the prosecutors. She couldn't have set Brandon up. No one's thinking that.
You are here to say if a crime has even been committed at all. You are here to say if I committed this very crime and if the state proved this to you beyond a reasonable doubt. If at the end of this trial you have reasonable doubt, then I remain innocent. If the state does not prove to you that I, 1, committed a crime, and 2, committed this crime, then I remain innocent.
It sounds like she's saying, yeah, I committed crimes, but I didn't commit this crime. How can the prosecutor prove she committed a crime without referencing a specific crime? This opening just keeps becoming more disjointed and bizarre, and finally, Lori starts questioning the nature of reality.
In this case, you will hear a lot of speculation. The definition of speculation is an idea or guess about something that is not known. During this trial, the state will try to convince you that I committed this crime by using speculation, innuendo, and insinuation. And the state is hoping that this will be enough. In this trial, you will in fact witness a power struggle between the state and the defendant.
Your Honor,
for what
I
a fact
object to
really
argument.
Sustain.
I have to admit, I really would have liked to hear where she was going with that. What does Lori think a fact is? Whatever her answer might be, I can almost guarantee it's either inaccurate or inaccurately applied. We've seen over and over that she can't properly distinguish between reality and fantasy, at least not at the margins. And maybe because of that, her projection is beginning to feel almost meta, almost self-reflective.
Because they want to convince you, the jury, that a fact is speculation, that a fact is innuendo, that a fact is insinuation, that they knew what I was thinking, what I was feeling, what I was planning, when they don't know it all. You, the jury, have all the power to decide what the facts are and what they're not. Not the state, not the judge, not law enforcement. You.
There's a fascinating degree of manipulation here. She is sucking up to the jury so hard. She's telling them that they're powerful, that they're too smart to be fooled by Trina Kay and Judge Boreski and the police, that they're the arbiters of truth. She says that they have the power to determine what the facts are. But we know from what she said previously that what she really means is they get to determine what facts are. It is not a jury's job to determine what constitutes reality. That's a pretty big ask of people who are getting paid $22 a day. Of all Lori's public statements, I think this is the most interesting because it tells us so much about her thought process. She makes a fundamental error here that I can only describe as devastatingly revealing. What she means to say is that Trina Kay is going to try to convince the jury that the story she's created is reality, that her speculation, innuendo, and insinuations are facts. But when Lori tries to express this idea, she reverses the words. She doesn't say, they want to convince you that speculation is fact. She says, they want to convince you that facts are speculation. That is precisely what Lori has tried to do in every single interview she's given. She keeps claiming that the facts aren't facts. We heard her tell Nate Eaton that all the facts about what happened to Tylee and JJ that were presented in the Idaho trial were just media spin.
That's the way it goes. So the media put out their narrative. They kept on with it. The state went along with it. The state leaked stuff to the media to say what they wanted.
What's false about the narrative?
Oh my gosh, everything.
Your children were found dead in Chad's backyard. That's not wrong. Tylee was chopped up and burned. That's not wrong.
No, that's all mixed up. That wasn't.
I saw photos of JJ wrapped in plastic and duct tape. That wasn't wrong.
Okay. I understand what you're saying of those facts. Those facts in and of themselves are wrapped around a whole lot of untruth.
There seems to be some sort of buffer between her mind and the world around her. It's almost like a mirror that reverses everything. She sees a world where every terrible thing she's ever done was done by someone else to her. She can't stop projecting to the point that every time she talks about someone else, you can assume she's really talking about herself. It's incredible in its pervasiveness. And I'll make a prediction right now. Lori says that she's writing a book about everything that's happened, but most especially, it seems like, it's about Tylee.
I'm writing it, and I'm going to write out every single thing from beginning to end so that people can really understand, because you can't understand what happened with Tylee and JJ unless you understand what happened to Tylee in her life.
I hereby predict that whatever she says about Tylee in that book is projection. Whatever horrors she claims happened to Tylee really happened to Lori. And whatever horrible things Tylee did were really done by Lori. That's my prediction.
So I implore you to listen carefully and decide for yourselves if the state's theory really makes logical sense. What motivation did I have? What malice have I ever shown to anyone? What benefit would I gain? I am a person who loves all people and has no malice towards anyone, not even the prosecutors who wrongfully try to convict me.
Your Honor, I'm going to object again to relevance and to argument.
Sustained.
I am all about spreading love and will continue to do so, even after this trial is complete, no matter the result. Thank you.
Lori telling the jury to use logic is peak irony. She's also telling us how she sees herself here, as a literal saint who loves everyone and forgives those who wrong her. This characterization couldn't be further from the truth. A week later, After again calling no witnesses and presenting no evidence, after continuing to testify while cross-examining witnesses, and after asking idiotic questions like, "Did you test the bullet fragments to see if it was a bullet?" Lori gave her closing argument. She seemed tired to me, although that might have been because she was still pretending to be on death's doorstep from whatever mild flu she had. I think by this point she had resigned herself to the likelihood that she was going to be convicted again. This is what I would characterize as a low-effort closing argument, and I say that partly because she tries to reuse the theme of family tragedy from her previous trial.
When a family breaks apart, it is a tragedy, with the devastation far-reaching, affecting many people.
The family tragedy idea doesn't make any sense here, partly because an attempted shooting that missed is hard to classify as a tragedy. A trauma, certainly, but a tragedy? Only for the car door. So she decides that Brandon and Melanie's divorce is the family tragedy, which is fine, except that this isn't a divorce case. It's an attempted M case, and she's just ignoring that.
I am not exempt from tragedy, none of us are. But what we learn from it is most important. Because of this experience, I've studied the law and the judicial system, and that knowledge will stay with me forever. When we experience tragedy, we can grow stronger from the experiences, and then those experiences are not all negative.
So Brandon nearly got his head blown off and had to go on the run with his 4 very small children for months because Chad had declared 2 of them dark and their lives were in literal danger. But that's all fine because it gave Lori an opportunity to become a jailhouse lawyer? That's what Lori wants us to take from this? I'm starting to understand why Lori and Melanie Gibb were such close friends. They're both devoted to toxic positivity. I've spent most of my life writing fiction and trying to get into characters' minds and imagine how they would interpret situations. But people like Lori make me feel like a hack. Because in 1,000 years, I never would have imagined that someone could come up with this. She started off saying that Melanie and Brandon's divorce was a tragedy, but now she's pivoted to the idea that it's her prosecution that's the real tragedy, and I'm not even sure she's aware that she's fundamentally altered the argument she's making within the first paragraph. She then claims to have proven during the case that she isn't angry or defensive. If she were innocent, I would expect her to be both angry and defensive. That seems like a rational response to being tried for something you didn't do. But she's too worried about appearing to be a perfect Christian to think about appearing innocent.
You can't be upset with people who are forced to look at your life from a distance or judge it through a lens that's being intentionally distorted or being at least very limited. Like the lens the state has shown you on this event. There's so much more going on that is not included to your view. The law prevents some of these things from being shared in trial.
Object, Your Honor, to improper.
Sustained.
We've gotten to the point that Judge Boreski isn't even making Trina Kay finish voicing her objections before he rules. This idea that there's so much more going on, and if people only understood all of it, they'd realize Lori is innocent, is one that she's come back to time and time again. It's in all her interviews.
You're giving up whatever the state put up. They don't put up the whole story, Nate.
And
they just put up tiny pieces to put together their own narrative. That's it. You don't know anything about our lives or how they were.
But she refuses to actually tell us what all these other things that would exonerate her are. At least until now. Now she's writing it all down from the beginning. And if you can get me an advance copy of the document she's writing, I will give you my firstborn child. Keep in mind that I'm 43 with no plans to have kids, but as Lori would say,
miracles are on the way.
Up until now, I assumed that Lori's failure to put on any sort of a defense was a combination of incompetence and the difficulties of being pro-per in jail. But now that I think about it, she did the exact same thing back when she had lawyers representing her. And her abysmal attempt at self-representation closely mimics this refusal to explain herself in interviews. Suddenly I'm not at all certain she's ever really going to release whatever it is she's writing. If she's even really writing anything. And that sort of smoke and mirrors game resembles the way doomsday cult leaders always come up with some reason why the apocalypse didn't happen on the date they predicted, and then they just set a new date. In fact, Lori did exactly that during her interview with Nate. She claimed that Chad had never said that the world would end on July 20th, 2020.
When you were on trial in Idaho, didn't you say that Jesus was going to be back before the end of that trial?
Okay, who said I said that?
I'm asking you, did you say
No,
that?
absolutely
You never said
not.
that.
I have never, Chad has never, we've never given a date or a time. The prophet...
Where'd July 20th
somebody
come from?
made that up and put it on there. I have never said it. Chad has never said it. We've never had a date. We're going with what the prophet says.
And it is really too late at night for me to start having deep thoughts.
You have seen opinions formed by strangers trying to put together a narrative. I have shown you that basically there is no defense to what a person did not do or did not participate in. Other than what you've seen, which is no evidence that I made an agreement to commit a crime, because no such evidence exists. So I'm not defensive. I'm not angry. Nobody has all the pieces to this puzzle. It is complex. Like most families, this is a complex issue. And like the state, I was not there. But there is no agreement, no plan, no game. I am no stranger to tragedy. The breaking up of a family is tragedy. On June 25th, 2019, Brandon Boudreau decided that I was responsible for his family tragedy. And I'm really sorry that he feels that way.
The fake crying is rough. So is this paragraph. It feels like she's just throwing whatever she can into this closing. There's no theme or core argument. It's like watching someone being chased through a grocery store and they're just grabbing random things off shelves to hurl behind themselves. People lie. You can't prove a negative. I'm a saint. Family is complicated. I wasn't there. I've been through tragedies. Divorce is a tragedy. Brandon's mad at me for telling people he's gay. I feel sad. It's giving verbal mad panic.
I did and have supported my niece Melanie when she suffered tragedy as a young child and during this terribly difficult time in 2019.
I don't know how Melanie's mother dying when Melanie was 6 has anything to do with this case. But I do want to point out that Lori's version of supporting Melanie at the time was deciding not to fly back from her Hawaiian vacation when she learned that Stacy was in a coma in hospice care. No one in the family flew back. I think it's a safe bet she was equally indifferent to Melanie's sorrow during her divorce.
We read the text from Brandon to me on June 25th, 2019, where he claims that he will never stop until he proves that I am responsible. Well, here we are, almost 6 years later, and I'm charged with conspiracy to commit first-degree. In order to have a conspiracy, 2 or more people have to make an agreement to commit a crime. There is no such agreement between me and my brother Alex, although I did love my brother Alex.
Okay, this crying I actually believe. I think she's crying because Alex is dead. I get that she loved her brother, but he's been dead for 5 years, and this is the closing argument of an attempted M trial. She seems to be suggesting that she and Alex didn't conspire to shoot Brandon, even though she did love Alex enough that she would have conspired with him to shoot Brandon if he'd wanted to. She doesn't want us to think that she didn't love Alex that much. She goes back to repeating that she and Trina Kay and Detective Pillar didn't witness the shooting, so they can't know what happened, and Detective Duncan didn't find a literal agreement to shoot Brandon anywhere in Lori's iCloud account, so it must not exist, and all the evidence is just lies seen through a glass darkly.
We've all experienced tragedies in our lives, and naturally people want someone to blame, someone to pay a price. My brother is no longer here. We can't ask him about that day. There were things presented in this case that I did not know.
And I would object again to testifying, Your Honor, and ask to strike.
Sustained.
Things that I saw, I thought.
And again, I'm going to already ask to strike.
All right. The defendant cannot testify to things that were not testified to from the witness stand.
Because this is the theory the prosecutor wants you to see, it is limited. How can we say clearly when the law only allows for a skewed view of things? The devastation this family has gone through is the tragedy. After almost 6 years, it's time for healing.
The gall of this woman to claim that it's time for healing. She just couldn't leave the podium without dropping one more nugget of reversed madness. Hello. I know it's only been an instant for you, but several weeks have passed for me, and for Lori too. My surgery went really well. I'm about 2 weeks out now, and I'm largely pain-free, although I seem to have hit a wall in terms of energy. I was planning to write and record this immediately after Lori's sentencing, but instead I spent all weekend in bed. Sorry for the delay, I've been advised not to push myself. Anyway, let's talk about Lori's sentencing. I thought the victim impact statements were amazing. I even wrote Krisha an email afterward because she just knocked that out of the park. Each of the speakers brought their own energy and their own perspective, from Larry's righteous rage to Todd's touching forgiveness, and Brandon's family members just seemed like good people. Because there were so many victims, the picture they painted of the scale of the suffering Lori and company has caused was incredibly robust. After all these years of focusing on Chad and Lori, we finally got to hear the story in its full color context. Everyone who spoke should be proud of how they stood up for Tylee, JJ, Tammy, Charles, and Brandon. And then Lori got to speak, and she seemed pretty feisty, which isn't too surprising given the plethora of sick burns she'd just received. She had Larry calling her a murderess and a psychopath, and Kay telling her she isn't special, and Krisha referring to Chad as Lori's side piece, which I don't think I've ever rolled on the floor laughing during a victim impact statement before, but that got me. So I don't doubt that Lori was on the back foot by the time it was her turn to speak. It's kind of too bad that she wasn't able to write her sentencing statement after hearing the victim impact statements. I can only imagine what she might have revealed while writing Enraged. I admit, I was disappointed by Lori's second sentencing statement. Almost nothing she said was new, and after so many heartrending and riveting victim impact statements, it felt... I'm going to quote T.S. Eliot. "This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but a whimper." It's an oddly fitting stanza to describe Chad and Lori. So there isn't too much to say about this statement, and I'm not going to play all of it. The statement can be roughly divided into two halves, the secular half and the religious half. She begins with the secular.
Representing myself at these 2 trials was a constitutional right that I exercised. I could not have done so without my team. Annalena Ramirez, my paralegal, Jeff White, my investigator, and Pamela Hicks and Robert Abernathy, my advisory counsel. I acknowledge their diligence and hard work in helping me exercise that right. They worked tirelessly, and I appreciate them.
For a moment, I thought she was going to go full Ruby Franke and give an Oscars speech, but she moved on to elaborating on what an amazing gift her law school education has been.
Representing myself, I have learned much about the law through this process, and I'm grateful for the knowledge that I have gained. Knowledge is eternal, and it is only love and the knowledge that we acquire in this life that we take with us into the next. I have studied the rules of law, case law, and the like. I was amazed and enlightened as my understandings were completely changed from before I started this process. Before this long court journey, I only had basic understanding of the judicial process. I was of the understanding that both parties would be able to get up at a trial and each tell their side of the story, But I soon learned that the rules of law do not allow that.
Actually, they do.
I have never heard a judge interject in the middle of a sentencing statement, and I'm a bit perplexed that Judge Boreski did so here. I've watched both the Sarah Boone and Jesse Krzyzewski trials in the last year, and they both spent an extended amount of time just trashing their victims during their statements. Like, Sarah Boone's statement was so deeply ugly that I couldn't even bring myself to make a video about it. I just didn't want to repeat the filthy lies she told about George Torres. But the judges in their cases didn't say a word. I'm not sure if Judge Boreski stepped in here because he felt like Lori shouldn't be allowed to lie, or if he felt personally attacked, which is entirely possible. Peter over at The Lawyer You Know admitted that this was probably a little inappropriate on Judge Boreski's part, but I imagine he was just so fed up with Lori at this point. And it's clear from the statement he made afterward that he feels quite passionately about the judicial system and about the Maricopa County system in particular. Regarding Lori's claim that she was amazed and enlightened by her so-called legal education, I would have loved to hear exactly what it was she learned, because she failed to demonstrate even a basic understanding of how a court case works. I wrote a blog post a couple of months ago that was called, "What Does Lori Think the Law Is?" where I talked about how most of Lori's concept of the legal system seems to have come from television and movies. At one of her pretrial hearings, she was livid and incredulous when Judge Boreski asked her what relevant testimony would be given by the witnesses she wanted to call. She basically accused him of asking her to reveal her legal strategy.
What relevant information would they have?
They have relevant information to Brandon Boudreaux.
Okay.
And around that time.
What is the nature of that relevant information?
It will come apparent if they have to get up and testify, Your Honor. I will only call them if I need
Well, they're going to
them.
be precluded if you can't give me some minimal what relevant information they have. Just saying that they're relevant doesn't make them relevant. Okay?
Yes, and is this procedure that I have to say what each of my witnesses are relevant ahead of time and give my whole case in chief over to the state? It is?
Yeah.
That's how it works? That's the rules of law?
Stop interrupting me. Yes.
She was upset that he was going to steal her thunder, but shocking surprises delivered by witnesses on the stand, while a staple of Law and Order, aren't really how you build a case. When a trial begins, lawyers for both sides should pretty much know what all the witnesses are going to say. Sure, it's a surprise to the jury. It's often a surprise to those of us watching, but it shouldn't be a surprise to the prosecutors or the defense team. I suspect Lori's inability to grasp this idea is why she didn't understand that Trina K had to be given the opportunity to depose Lori's witnesses either. As with every other part of her life, Lori is more concerned with how things appear than how they are. She wanted to look like the perfect mother and the perfect wife and the perfect Mormon. She extended that idea to her case. She wanted to tell her story in the spotlight, like she was being interviewed by Gayle King instead of doing the hard work of figuring out which witnesses could provide which little bricks of factual evidence to build a wall. And this even extends to her court filings. I think that Lori believes her motions had merit simply because she formatted them properly and used legal-sounding language. I'm going to read from one of her most recent filings. This one was her motion for a new trial in Brandon's case. Also, what in God's name is going on with Lori's handwriting? I need some YouTuber who does handwriting analysis to take a look and tell me what is happening here. It's so controlled and yet so flamboyant. The opening passage reads, and some of this I had to guess at because of the combination of Lori's handwriting and a low-res scanner, but I think it reads, "The defendant, Lori Daybell, hereby requests this court to grant the defendant's motion for new trial. There is violations to USCA Amend 4th for violations of medical evaluation, lack of impartiality, and misuse of discretion. 1. Derval of Rule 13.5 hearing. 2. Not releasing the jury from the admonition on the record. And 3. Allowing GSR and DNA evidence without sufficient foundation, and denial of right to confront witnesses. Thus violations of due process, Brady Rule, Fry Rule, long citation, USCA Court Amend 5.6.14, USCA Court Article 6 C1.2, State and Federal Rules of Evidence 501 and 702, Daubert, Junk Science, Newton's Third Law, Strickland. I read this and I thought, wait, Newton's third law of motion? So I said to Gosha, hey, remind me what Newton's third law of motion is. He said, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Why? I told him, and we had a good laugh. Later, I tried to figure out what this reference to Strickland means. It refers to a court case regarding ineffective assistance of counsel, known as Strickland, which was referenced in Harrington versus Richter in this quotation. Attempting to establish this, the Court of Appeals held that defense counsel should have offered expert testimony to rebut the evidence from the prosecution. But Strickland does not enact Newton's third law for the presentation of evidence, requiring for every prosecution expert an equal and opposite expert from the defense. Does this have anything to do with Lori? No. I ended up reading quite a bit of the Strickland decision. It's irrelevant to this case. Lori fundamentally fails to understand that this reference to Newton's third law is essentially using it as a metaphor for how defense attorneys might counter evidence put forth by the prosecution. They're saying that the decision in Strickland doesn't require defense attorneys to counter every single piece of evidence that prosecutors present. That has nothing to do with Lori's case. In fact, all signs suggest that Lori either can't comprehend the difference between a law of motion and a law, or else all she cares about is having something to write down on her motion. She might even have thought it was a correct citation because she cited it in a motion, as if a law of motion were the same thing as a law cited in a motion. And I didn't feel like doing the research to figure out what the rest of these references might mean, because I have spent an obscene amount of time on this video already. But I assume that the rest are equally likely to be irrelevant or have nothing to do with the legal system. But it's the appearance that's important. This is the legal manifestation of Lori's prioritization of appearances. She can't tell the difference between the trappings of emotion, like citing things called laws, and actually making a legal argument. That's why she was so confused when Judge Boreski told her that almost none of her motions had legal merit. Lori thinks that citing laws is the merit. I'm going to skip the next bit of Lori's statement because it's boring. Lori complains about how she wasn't allowed to call certain witnesses or ask certain questions because she doesn't understand hearsay and she doesn't understand the rules of evidence. And she just keeps demonstrating that she doesn't understand the legal system at all. Then she brings in the founding fathers and how this isn't the judicial system they imagined.
It was never their intention for people to be sitting in jail for years and years waiting to be tried while the state continues to try to gather new evidence against them. This is what our unjustice system has become. Men and women sitting in jail for years and waiting to be heard. The constitutional right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness thwarted.
I mostly played this clip because Lori making up the term unjustice system is so Sarah Boone. Is it possible she's read Sarah's letters? I can't imagine how or why she would. I admit I like her use of the word thwarted here. For all her inability to reason, she has high verbal intelligence. Lori repeats her complaints about conditions in the Maricopa County Jail, all of which we heard about in her interviews. This is another one of those times when Lori isn't necessarily wrong, but she's chosen the wrong forum. The only reason to talk about this during her sentencing statement is to cast herself, yet again, as a victim. She also contradicts herself by claiming that inmates don't get proper nutrition, and then saying that the jail offered her a vitamin D supplement. So, I guess they want the inmates to get scurvy but still be cheerful.
98% of all cases in Maricopa County end in plea deals where the accused plead guilty. And I'll tell you why. It's so miserable in that jail that they plead guilty so they can go to the prison and have decent food, decent sunlight, and a
chance to live. 2% of all cases in Maricopa County that actually do go to trial, of all the cases that actually do go to trial, only 0.2 end in acquittal. That is 1 out of 1,200 people who go to trial go home.
That's actually not the correct stat.
Judge Boreski is done with Lori and her mouthing off about the justice system. I'm curious about why this particular statistic was enough to get a rise out of him, though, given that Lori's math makes no sense. Gosha and I tried to comprehend her formula. Depending on what she meant by 0.2, we got answers ranging from 1 in 250 to 1 in 25,000. But we never did figure out how she came to 1 in 1,200. Pretty fun date, though.
Is that a system designed to convict you? The rules of law governing trial assure that. As you witnessed in my 2 cases, the judge supports the state to achieve this outcome. So here we are, the state of Arizona has accomplished its intention. 1, to extradite me from Idaho. 2, to convict me. And 3, to add to my ledger of lifetimes.
Ledger of lifetimes. She's got that Sarah Boone energy for sure. It's interesting that she suggests that her extradition was a goal in and of itself. All of the goals she mentions here are basically the same goal, to hold her accountable for what she did to Charles and Brandon. I think she breaks them up because she sees them as separate insults. Although, I should clarify, I also think she's bragging. She's brought up her multiple life sentences both in court and in interviews, and I think she believes that it's a symbol of how persecuted she is. It's actually sort of unfortunate that she ended up with 7, because I'm sure this is on her mind.
And you're well aware that the 3 Nephites in 3 Nephi 28 were given the death penalty 7 times. They were arrested after Jesus personally translated them, okay? They were arrested, convicted, and given the death penalty 7 times.
Lori is very much capable of seeing meaning where there's only coincidence, and I'm sure she uses those sorts of interpretations to bolster her delusional beliefs. She ends the secular half of her statement like this.
The state of Arizona brought me here when I was already serving 5 life sentences. Now I will serve 7 life sentences. Will that be enough? Will that be enough?
I think it's safe to say that when someone repeats themselves in a speech, it's because they think what they're saying is really important. But it isn't clear to me what Lori feels is so important here. Enough for what exactly? Enough for whom? Is she trying to suggest that the state of Arizona might just decide to keep going, to keep charging her and trying her for things? That's a strange one. Unless she knows there are other things for which she might be charged. Then she begins the religious half of the statement by paraphrasing her first sentencing statement. She says that she's mourning too, and she once again describes her purported NDE in the vaguest of terms. She makes this statement.
If I was accountable for these crimes, I would acknowledge it, and I would let you know how sorry I was. But I have witnessed for myself what it is like to leave this mortal existence and return home when I temporarily died in the hospital giving birth to my daughter, Tylee.
There's an interesting word choice here. Lori says, if I was, it ought to be if I were, but ignore that. If I was accountable for these crimes. What I assume she meant was if I were responsible for these crimes, but instead she says accountable, and I don't think it's an accident. I think she unconsciously avoided saying if I were responsible because she knows she is responsible. Instead, she makes the pointlessly obvious statement that if she were going to take accountability, she'd apologize. Like, yeah, Lori, we know. You're refusing to be accountable, but you are responsible. Then she goes on to add that she isn't taking accountability because she's been dead and it's great. So I guess there's nothing to take accountability for because she did these people a favor. I think she accidentally said what she meant here. But what a messed up thing to say. She continues.
When our spirit leaves our body and we return to the pure energy state in the spirit world, we immediately no longer feel hate, anger, envy, or resentment. I promise you. We come to earth to experience these emotions, but these emotions are immediately replaced by a blissful, heightened sense of peace, love, joy, and well-being. The moment our spirit leaves our body, we feel more alive than we ever did on earth. And we have deep empathy for those we have left behind.
I don't believe Lori has had an NDE, which brings me to this question. What exactly is Lori describing here? Presumably, her fantasy. Lori believes what she wants to believe. She's telling us that she doesn't want to feel hate, anger, envy, or resentment. And by saying that, she's admitting to feeling all those things. She wants constant peace, love, and joy instead. And that's interesting because Lori is so buoyant so much of the time. She was cheerful and chatty before her sentencing, and she left the courtroom with a big smile on her face, one that didn't even waver when someone shouted for her to rot in hell. It feels like she wants to prove to everyone that she's already this evolved soul who's experiencing life from an eternal perspective, even though she says that we came to Earth to experience all these negative things. It's another moment when Lori basically tells us that she hates being alive, that she associates life with unpleasantness. Lori wants us to believe that she's so spiritually evolved that she's already moving through life like an angel. She's no longer burdened by negative emotions, while simultaneously telling us that she associates being alive with being miserable.
We do not want our loved ones to grieve or be sad. We know that they will because that's a mortal experience, but they come to comfort us.
Again, she's connecting being alive with suffering. I'm not letting Lori off the hook for anything, but I do want to acknowledge all the little ways that she lets us know she's been unhappy for most of her life, because that plays heavily into my final theory about Lori Daybell. I'm distracted, however, by this speaking error and the correction she makes. Lori gets confused here about who's who. We don't want our loved ones to grieve or be sad means that Lori is imagining herself being dead and her loved ones still being alive. She says she knows they'll be sad because they're mortal, so we, by which I assume she means herself and other dead people, will go to comfort them. But she stops after saying we and changes it to they come to comfort us.
We immediately know the minute you leave your body, you are aware of who you are, why you came to earth, and that we will all be together again soon, and that this separation is only temporary. All of the cares and pressures and problems immediately melt away. And after comforting our loved ones, we move on with our eternal life, continuing to pursue knowledge and wisdom and understanding in eternal progression.
She stops and rephrases a second time, and once again, she changes point of view. We immediately know the minute you leave your body. This isn't an error I've seen Lori make in previous statements, but she makes it twice here. And both times, she's confusing who's dead and who's alive. Personally, I think she's confused because she's lying. I think that with her critical thinking deficits, it's hard for her to keep track of everyone's roles when imagining that she's dead and interacting with people who are still alive. Just a theory, but it might give us a deception indicator to look for in Lori's future statements, should she ever make any. Then she returns to her refrain about how busy heaven is, how it's the New York City subway on Black Friday.
Heaven is a very busy and happy place where everyone is engaged in projects that they love to do. That includes Joshua, that includes Tylee, that includes Tammy, that includes Charles. No one there, none of these people are seeking revenge or justice. So although we miss our loved ones, and I do too, I assure you that they are busy and happy and peaceful.
What she's implying here is that none of the people she killed are seeking revenge or even justice, so no one else should either. And I'll say this much for Lori. Unlike Sarah Boone and Jesse Kuchevsky, who used their sentencing statements to double down on what awful people their victims were, Lori has used both of hers to assure us that her victims are at peace now. She's at least given them happy endings in her fantasy. And I actually think that tells us something really significant about who Lori is as a person. There is a part of her that genuinely wants peace and happiness for everyone.
I have felt the kind of contentment that they feel now, and I try to duplicate that here. So whether I'm giving 5 life sentences or 7 life sentences, I will continue to try to uplift and help and strengthen those around me. It does not matter where you serve on earth as long as you do it with love. It doesn't matter if I'm given 7 lifetimes or the death penalty like my husband. What things look impossible to man are easy for Jesus. Jesus tells us in the Bible not to judge, but this whole entire justice system is just that. So I want you to watch, because God will show the world great miracles. I will continue to love everyone I come in contact with, and I will turn this battle over to God. If this is God's battle, then the math doesn't matter. 7 lifetimes or the death penalty doesn't matter. God's miracles will abound.
If this is God's battle, then the math doesn't matter. It's a pithy little line, but is she really trying to say that she's going to turn her court case over to God? I think she's actually talking about a much larger battle of which her case is only a tiny part.
When a soldier goes off to war, he is a soldier. When a soldier comes back from war, he is a warrior. And Jesus is in the prisons. He is turning his soldiers into warriors. For the prisoners shall go free. Sometimes victory doesn't look like victory until it's finished. Prisoners who have been told that they will never go free will be free. And I want you to expect miracles, and I want you to watch for them, because you will see. We fear not what man can do, because God's warriors surround us. When the battle is relentless, and this one has been for over 6 years, remember, God is building his army of warriors in the prison system. He is turning Sauls into Pauls. When Jesus is sending his servants into the prisons to prepare his warrior team, we will be there only until this purpose is complete, and then the warriors will walk free. We are redeemed by Jesus Christ, so we are free right now, but his chains will break. Prison walls will fall. The power and majesty of God will be revealed. When Jesus is ready, he will call his warriors from the prisons, and we will walk free, and we will serve him.
This poor woman with the gauges in the background, she can barely contain her side eye. I feel for her. I'm not good at controlling my expression either. The idea that soldiers and warriors are fundamentally different appears to be original to Lori. I looked up the definitions of both words in several different dictionaries, and none of them made a distinction. But I think there's something here. Without doxing him, I will say that the word warrior appears in Lori's father's email address. And Lori and Melanie Gibb ran a podcast with Jason Mao called the Time to Warrior Up podcast. That's Jason's platform, Time to Warrior Up. So when Lori emphasizes this distinction, I think she really believes there's a difference. And I'm guessing that the difference is that a soldier serves a leader, but a warrior serves Christ. Lori specifies that these warriors are being prepared within the prisons. I can't remember if there's an actual scene of prison inmates being freed in Visions of Glory. We'll get to it later, if there is. But I know there's one in Chad's writing. For anyone who hasn't watched my epic free dive into Chad Daybell's writing or read his truly dreadful books, there's a character named Sharam who's a minor bad guy in the Chad Daybell Doomsday universe. I dug this quote out of the second book of the Standing in Holy Places series, The Celestial City. Here, Sharam is explaining how he escaped from prison. The state claimed I had violated my parole and sent me back to prison. But I consider it an act of God that I was sent back there, because soon came the monstrous earthquake and the flooding of Utah Valley. As the water drained from Utah Lake into the narrow channel at the point of the mountain, it turned into a raging torrent 50 feet deep. The prison literally shook as the first wave slammed into it, and the water level didn't drop for several hours. Most of the inmates were locked in their cells at the time and didn't stand a chance as the floodwaters rushed in. Then how did you survive? Ken asked. I was one of the lucky ones who was getting some sunshine in the outside yard. As the flood hit, the guards took off and left us alone. The water pushed us against a brick building, and as the water got deeper, we just kept moving higher on the wall. Soon it was deep enough for us to reach the roof. As pieces of debris floated by, we would each grab a piece, and then we floated right over the prison fences. I think I'd forgotten how stupid Chad's ideas are. Anyway, I think Lori probably believes this is how, or potentially how, Jesus might free her and or Chad from prison. Jesus will send a flood while they're out in the yard, and they'll float right over the barbed wire fences. All they have to do is stay faithful and wait for Jesus to call on them to assemble. Chad better hope Jesus doesn't send a flood, though, because death row inmates don't get outdoor recreation in Idaho. Judge Boreski said in his remarks just after this that the line about Jesus freeing all the prisoners is a metaphor and not to be taken literally. He's still getting to know Lori and hasn't yet grasped how literal she is in all circumstances. She believes Jesus is going to free her and Chad, one way or another, and she's using this time in confinement to transform, or perhaps translate, from a soldier to a warrior.
I will quote Moroni, the great prophet, from Moroni 8:16, and he says, "Behold, I speak with boldness, having authority from God. I fear not what man can do, for perfect love casteth out all fear." And in Ether, Moroni says, "And now, if I have no authority for these things, judge ye. For ye shall know that I have authority when ye shall see me, and we shall stand before God at the last day."
That second quote is Ether 5:6. If I understand correctly, and there's no guarantee that I do, but I try my best. If I understand correctly, what Moroni is saying here is, go ahead and judge me, but when the world ends, you'll see that I was right. Lori's anticipating how, in the future, she'll be able to say, I told you so, to all of us. That's the end of her statement. The two quotations and then the dramatic pushing away of the microphone. I guess you can't really mic drop when the mic is attached to the table. And unless she does decide to publish the Book of Lori, that's likely to be the last we hear from her other than the occasional telephone interview. Idaho inmates aren't allowed to appear on camera for interviews. I like to end my videos by asking two questions. The first is, how could we have made this writing better? I'm going to do my best to take that question seriously, even though it's difficult, and to avoid resorting to saying we'd have to fix Lori's brain, although clearly that would help. Regarding Lori's opening statements and closing arguments, I think that she should have let her advisory council weigh in on what she was going to say. The fact that Trina Kay was able to object over and over, and I don't even think she made every objection she could have, and that those objections were sustained had to have hurt Lori's credibility with the jury. You don't want the jury's first impression of you to be that you're incompetent. That's going to color the rest of the case for them. Obviously, there's a lack of clarity in organization, especially during that last trial. That closing argument felt like a flailing cat in a crock pot. I think Lori got tired and was struggling to form her thoughts into sentences. As I was contemplating her sentencing statements, I decided to look up exactly what the intention of a sentencing statement is. Because honestly, I've seen so many that were offensive or bizarre that I didn't actually know. The website I visited belongs to one Howard A. Snader, Phoenix attorney. This is from his page, Sample Allocution Statement. Allocution is the formal name for a sentencing statement. Mr. Snader writes, an allocution is simply a formal speech. In the context of a criminal case, it is the one opportunity to humanize your client before the court, and in many cases, the prosecutor and victim as well. Did these allocutions humanize Lori? I don't know, but they certainly didn't make her more likable. And I can guarantee they didn't make Judge Boreski or Trina Kay like her more. Mr. Snader says, "In making an allocution, I believe there are a few do's and don'ts. Simply stated, avoid cliches." By and large, Lori did manage to avoid cliches. Now, she messed up with her use of the quote from Jesus about how people shouldn't cast the first stone, but the rest of her statements were, if nothing else, so bonkers that they at least felt somewhat original. I guess that's 1 point for Lori. Mr. Snader continues, "The client should not be overly apologetic, narcissistic, or given 'I have seen the light' type of speech." Well, she certainly wasn't overly apologetic. That's for sure, since she didn't apologize for anything at all. Was she narcissistic? I don't know. Is claiming that you don't have to be sorry because you're Jesus's favorite considered narcissistic? An example of the "I have seen the light" speech is just that, telling the court that you have seen the light, or if you give me probation, you will have my guarantee that you will never see me again, are meaningless. The court has no way to determine the truthfulness or sincerity of those comments. If you take the light to mean the one you see at the end of a tunnel when you die, then Lori did make an "I have seen the light" speech. More than one, in fact. -2 points. A sincere apology is always appropriate. If it comes from the heart, everyone will know it. I advise clients to not hold back on their emotions, crying, etc. This makes them appear more sincere and contrite. It is appropriate for the client to be scared, nervous, humble, and contrite. She did appear sincere, and she certainly didn't hold back. But scared? No. Nervous? No. Humble? Definitely not. Contrite? Try conceited. Contemptuous. Confabulatory. Condescending. Confounding. I could go on, but I think I'll leave it at convicted. Telling the court that they are taking full responsibility has little meaning. I would not be surprised if a judge were to turn to my client one of these days and ask how they are taking full responsibility. That is the true question the client must be prepared to address. Answering that question requires the client to make an affirmative, positive statement about their wrongful conduct. Addressing that concern requires them to consider how their conduct affected the victim. Lori mentions Charles once to say that he's very busy in heaven. She never bothers to mention Brandon at all. She's not taking responsibility for nothing. Notice I have said nothing about excuses. There are no good excuses or rationalizations. Where the client has maintained their innocence, I believe silence is the best policy. Mr. Snader is correct. Lori has maintained her innocence and should have said nothing. The client must take responsibility. They should be prepared to state how they will correct their behavior. The closest Lori came was promising to continue to love everyone in prison. Her falling in love at first sight with Chad is how this whole mess began, so she's essentially doubling down. I think Mr. Snader gives some good advice in this article. I imagine Lori was given similar advice by her attorneys and standby counsel, none of which she took. I give her a D. The second question that I like to ask at the end of a video is, what have we learned about the author by reading this? We've learned that Lori is not just delusional, but manipulative. That she's not just manipulative, but delusional. Part of the reason that people find Lori so infuriating seems to be that they want her to be one or the other. But she's obviously both, and I doubt we'll ever know where one ends and the other begins. We have learned in this video, no, seriously, we have learned that her default is to play the victim, and that she's projecting almost constantly. Projection seems like too much of an internal process for her to have learned it from her father, but I'm not sure if thought processes can be genetic. It might just be that projection works, so a lot of people do it. Probably all of us at one time or another. We don't want to acknowledge certain feelings or actions within ourselves, so we project them onto other people. Lori says she's not defensive, but projection is a defense mechanism. So on some level, we can say that everything she projects is something she dislikes in herself or can't bear to feel. She's ashamed or embarrassed that she conspired against Brandon, so she accuses him of conspiring against her. She hates that she was cheating on Charles, so she claims he was cheating on her. She can't bear to face that she killed Charles, so she accuses him of trying to kill her. She walks through life hurting people, and when they call her on it, she says, "I know you are, but what am I?" and keeps on walking. If she had been willing and able to face her own flaws and grow, really grow instead of just trying to reinterpret events until they cast her in a more favorable light, we might not be here. None of this would have happened. We've seen evidence, especially in her sentencing statements, that despite the smiles and bouncy walk and the giggling, Lori is an unhappy person. She's so deeply damaged that she's a menace to society. But I do believe there is a part of her, not the majority, but a small part, that sincerely wants to be a good person. She wants to love unconditionally and forgive without exception and be the mother her children deserved and the Christian the church tried to teach her to be. And she failed, and I think she'll continue to fail. I don't think she's capable of changing, of seeing herself clearly. She's too far gone, because admitting she failed would require experiencing a tremendous amount of embarrassment and shame. And as we saw in her father's book, those are very scary emotions in her family. Actually, the embarrassment and shame would be the least of what she had to face. Imagine having a choice between remaining embedded in a delusion where you're Jesus' favorite or admitting you killed your own children. There's no incentive to get well there. And far worse than the fact that she's failed in every endeavor that this small, well-intentioned part of her attempted is the fact that the greater part of Lori succeeded. The majority of Lori Daybell is not a person who's trying to do good or be good, only to appear good. She kept coming back to this theme of tragedy, even when it no longer made sense in context. I thought at first that it was more projection, that she was claiming to be a victim of tragedy to avoid the fact that she has been the tragedy. But when I was on the phone with Red Vines a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about visions of glory, about what I've been calling the priesthood of the suffering of Christ. And it dawned on me that the reason Lori is so obsessed with the tragedies in her life is that she believes she's joining that fellowship. Her unhappy life and the tragedies she's enduring are the suffering required to get her ordained into that priesthood. She thinks that all of this, the deaths that she perceives as losses, the so-called victimization, her incarceration, is a form of suffering that's sanctifying her in preparation for her glorious final mission. The author of Visions of Glory described it as a foreordination, which stuck out to me because I wasn't sure I'd ever seen the word before. But Lori used it during her interview with Nate Eaton.
Would you change anything that's happened over the past 6 years?
Oh, that's a good question, Nate. I don't think I could, because we were foreordained to do this mission.
She wouldn't change a thing. She didn't say, well, I wish God could have figured out a way to accomplish all this without so much suffering and death. She didn't say, I wish my kids were still alive. The only conclusion I know how to draw from her response is that she doesn't regret these things, which seems obvious because she's completely unrepentant. But why doesn't she regret all of this? If God is capable of all things, why isn't she pointing out that he could have accomplished all of this without bloodshed? And that led me to a really dark thought. Lori wanted to be special. Lori wanted to be holy. Not just holy, the holiest. At some point, Lori read Visions of Glory. She wanted to be part of that inner circle at the heart of the latter-day mission, to join the priesthood of the suffering of Christ. But her life was slowly improving. She had money, a devoted husband, beautiful homes, friends, smart, interesting children. It seems like her life was becoming more stable over time instead of less. So she dove into her delusions and came up with a new delusional belief.
So in 2017, I was told by the Lord that I was going to become like Job and lose everything. Will I do this job if I lose everything?
Is it possible that one's unconscious desires can manifest as delusions in someone who already struggles with delusions? We'd have to ask Dr. John, but my gut instinct is probably. And if it is, does that mean that Lori blew up her own life, while in denial that she was doing exactly that, in order to join the priesthood of the suffering of Christ? Is that possible? Did she and Chad create these tragedies in order to claim that they were worthy of being Jesus' most beloved servants and helping him build the New Jerusalem? I'll be the first to admit this is a wild theory, because that would be such a twisted thing to do. But while we'll never know for certain what happened to Lori's sister Stacy or Tylee's father Joe Ryan, the fact is that Lori has a well-established history of screwing up her own life and creating her own suffering. So does her father. Going to prison because you refused to pay your taxes when you had the money to do so is the definition of voluntary crime. Advertising your legal services when you aren't a lawyer, voluntary crime. Waiting outside the family visit center so that you can taser your brother's testicles on his way to his car, voluntary crime. A lot of members of the Cox family seem to have a habit of blowing up their own lives through unforced errors. This would also explain why Lori is so determined to present herself as a victim. She has to be a victim because that's how the priesthood initiation works. You don't join by choosing to destroy your own life and the lives of everyone around you. As Spencer taught us in Visions of Glory, you join by being a victim and suffering. That's how he joined. And we keep seeing Lori emulate Spencer, right down to her near-death experience that she ripped off from the book. Lori is a confusing person to the rest of us. Sometimes I feel like I'm trying to chase her through a funhouse full of mirrors, and I'm lost in a sea of projections and reflections and differing identities. Is Lori Lori, or is she Lolly reincarnated? Or is she Elena? Is it Chad or James or Moroni? Is it Tom Harrison or Spencer? Is she Lori Cox or Lori Ryan, Lori Vallow, Lori Daybell, Laura Lee? I don't know. What I do know is that Lori will never figure it out either. She'll never stop running through that funhouse long enough to face her own true reflection. She'll keep running, because as long as she's running, she doesn't have to look back at what she's done, at the immense suffering she's created. She'll just keep running toward a glorious future that she'll never reach, discarding self after self, husband after husband, child after child, running and never realizing she's running from herself. She is the Antichrist she fears. And maybe that's the true tragedy of Lori Daybell. That's all for this video, and probably the last I'll have to say about Lori, unless she really does publish this autobiographical scripture. Look, she's invented a new literary genre. Join me next time for more Visions of Glory, or possibly for Chad's train dream, depending on where my mood takes me. Also, a big thanks to Nate Eaton and East Idaho News for their interview with Lori. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking or subscribing. Please don't reach out to anyone involved in this case who hasn't invited contact, and remember to use your words wisely. Thanks. I'm creating this surgery. God help me if I have to create my own surgery. Reaction to IV contrast and falls out of... Wait, is that in past tense? She's saying that Jesus understands her, and as I was reading this, I thought I was letting Lori read it. What the hell was that? My Costco shipment is ready. Great. That was worth retakes. Trina K. Angry cat sound. Except she never got Coach Greg on the stand. Did I say ton the stand? What does it mean to ton the stand? In fact, am I reading this in present tense? God, this tense thing is confusing. And 2 quotations, and then the dramatic, this tech who swabbed Alex's hand was named Tammy. What am I suddenly having a hard time reading? But she knew she hadn't been able to serve summons to Summer. Wait, what are all these S words? And the Maricopa system in Perkakala. We might have to summons to Summer with a subpoena to serve. That's not that sentence. It's not what I wrote. I did not write that. But we know from the last... Did I just burp in the middle of a sentence? Dear heaven. Okay, well that's getting cut. I think I have something in my eye. An attempted shooting that missed is hard to try. And what is happening with this hair tie? Aware that she's fundamentally altered. Oh. But is she really, what am I saying here? Closely resembles the way Doomsday it's a hair problem night. In the middle of a sentence she had with just balked there like a scared horse.